The Universal Almanac of Mildly Interesting Facts. Chapter 1. The Inconvenience of Vastness. The universe is large. This is a statement that is easy to say, but remarkably difficult to mentally process. The human brain, and indeed most sentient brains in the galaxy, is evolved primarily to deal with problems of a very specific scale. Specifically, problems the size of a berry, a predator, or a missing set of keys. When the brain attempts to comprehend the sheer scale of the cosmos, it generally panics and tries to distract itself by wondering if it left the oven on. Let us try to visualize it. Imagine a peanut, a standard, salted peanut. Now imagine that this peanut represents the entirety of your personal experience. Your house, your commute, your cat, your favorite mug, and that time you tripped over a curb in 1998. All of it is contained within the shell of this single peanut. Now, imagine that this peanut is sitting in the center of a warehouse, but not just any warehouse. This is the Great Galactic Storage Facility of Sector 7. It is a warehouse so large that the forklift drivers require navigational computers just to find the lunchroom. Now imagine that this warehouse is merely one box in a stack of boxes on a delivery truck driven by a giant named Colin. And Colin is driving across a continent that stretches for infinite miles. And even that analogy, clumsy as it is, fails to capture even 1/1,000,000th of the true vastness of space. It is, to use the technical term, ridiculously big. Because it is so big, measuring it has always been a source of great headache for the Department of Weights, Measures and Apathy. Since we have touched upon the subject of the Department of Weights, Measures and Apathy, it seems only polite to pay them a brief mental visit. The department is located on the asteroid of Bureaucratic Minor, a rock so unremarkable that most star charts accidentally leave it off, assuming it was a smudge on the lens of the telescope. The headquarters itself is a triumph of brutalist beige architecture. It is a large square building made of a concrete composite that was specifically designed to absorb enthusiasm. If you were to run towards the front doors shouting with joy, by the time you reached the reception desk, you would find yourself walking at a sensible pace and wondering if you remembered to file your taxes. Let us glide silently through the lobby. The floor is covered in a carpet of indeterminate color. It is not quite brown, not quite gray. It is the color of a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It muffles footsteps so effectively that the only sound in the entire building is the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of rubber stamps hitting paper in slow motion. The air here is cool, still, and smells faintly of photocopier toner and stale biscuits. The staff of the department are chosen for their unique biological ability to lower their heart rates at will. They are the Vogons' distant, much quieter cousins, the Sci-Gons. Unlike their poetry-loving relatives, the Sci-Gons have no interest in torture or destruction. They only care about accuracy, and they do not like to be rushed. To the right of the lobby is the Hall of Standardized Lengths. Here, under glass cases, sit the defining units of the universe. You will see the standard inch, you will see the metric meter, and you will see the imperial piece of string. This last item is the most heavily guarded artifact in the galaxy. It is a piece of twine of indeterminate length, used to answer the ancient question, how long is a piece of string? The answer, calculated by the department after 4 centuries of study, is depends, really. Further down the hall we find the Office of Apathy. This is where the department calculates the weight of abstract concepts. Just last week, they successfully weighed the concept of Monday. They did this by placing a Monday morning on one side of a giant brass scale and piling feathers on the other side. It turns out that a single Monday morning weighs approximately the same as 3 billion tons of wet lead. This discovery was filed, stamped, and then immediately ignored because doing anything about it would have required far too much energy. It is a peaceful place, a place where gravity feels slightly heavier, not because of physics, but because the very atoms of the building just can't be bothered to float around. The lights do not flicker. They glow with a steady, low-wattage dimness that is very easy on the eyes. The dust motes in the air do not dance. They hang suspended, perfectly balanced, waiting for permission to land. Leaving the department, we float back up, away from the grey carpet, away from the quiet stamping, and return to the comforting velvet darkness of deep space. Historically, early civilizations tried to measure space using light years. This is the distance light travels in 1 year. It is a good measurement, but it relies on light, which, as any physicist will tell you, is notoriously flighty stuff. Light refuses to stand still. It bends around corners, it gets absorbed by black holes, it bounces off mirrors to make people look wider than they actually are. So, the interstellar almanac of reasonably reliable information was commissioned to find a better unit of measurement. The committee met on the neutral planet of Mundania. Now, Mundania is a world that is frequently overlooked by intergalactic travelers, largely because it is very easy to miss. It does not sparkle, it does not glow. It is a planet that is colored entirely in shades of taupe and eggshell. If one were to open the official travel brochure for Mundania, a trifold pamphlet printed on recycled matte paper, one would find the following stirring invitation. Mundania, come for the sidewalks, stay for the predictable weather patterns. The brochure goes on to describe the planet's unique geological features, or rather, the lack of them. Mundania has no mountains, as the local council decided that mountains were a bit ostentatious and unnecessarily steep. They also filled in all the canyons because they were deemed a safety hazard. Instead, the planet consists of endless, perfectly flat plains of well-maintained pavement, interspersed with neatly trimmed hedges that are legally required to be exactly waist height. It is the only planet in the galaxy that is entirely suburban. The gravity is standard, the air pressure is standard, even the rotation of the planet has been adjusted so that the sun never sets, nor does it rise. It simply hangs in the sky at a perpetual, non-threatening late afternoon. It is always tea time on Mundania. The brochure highlights the local wildlife, which consists primarily of the domesticated shrug. The shrug is a small, furry creature that does not hunt, graze, or mate. It simply sits on garden fences and looks mildly disappointed. Tourists are advised to visit the capital city normality. Here, one can visit the Museum of Adequate Solutions. The museum features extensive exhibits on the history of the paperclip, the evolution of the beige cardigan, and a hall of fame dedicated to people who arrived at meetings exactly on time. But the true attraction of Mundania, as the brochure proudly notes in a font that is sensible and sans serif, is the weather. There are no hurricanes. There are no monsoons. The Mundanian Meteorological Service guarantees that the forecast for the next 10,000 years will be fine, with a chance of a light breeze later on. It is the perfect environment for serious thought. There are no distractions, no sunsets to admire, no thunderstorms to dodge, just a flat, grey horizon that stretches on forever, inviting the mind to wander, or better yet, to go blank. It was the ideal location for the committee. They sat in a beige room at a beige table, drinking beige tea for 600 years. After much deliberation and several naps, they decided that light years were too dramatic. They proposed a new unit of measurement based on something more constant, more reliable, and more plentiful than light. They decided to measure the universe in queues. Specifically, the length of the queue at the post office on the planet Glum V on a Monday morning just before Christmas. This is a distance known to be mathematically infinite. Therefore, when we say the universe is big, what we really mean is that it is roughly equivalent to 3.5 post office queues in diameter. It is through this vast, silent, and poorly measured void that we are currently traveling. Let us take a moment to appreciate the vessel that protects us from the vacuum. You are currently resting aboard a Class 4 sleeper sloop. The Class 4 was designed by the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation's Division of Comfort. Unlike other ships, which are designed for speed, combat, or hauling decorative rocks, the Class 4 was designed with one singular mission: to be extremely pleasant to sit in. The walls are not made of cold steel. They are lined with a synthetic velvet known as polite fur. It is a material that was genetically engineered to be soft, but not so soft that it tickles. The engines do not roar, They utilize a propulsion system known as the improbability-free drift drive. Most engines work by burning fuel to create thrust. This is considered vulgar and loud. The drift drive works on a different principle entirely. It utilizes the power of reluctance. The ship simply identifies where it is currently located, decides that it would rather be somewhere else, and then slowly, grumpily, slides across the universe to the new location, complaining the entire way in a low-frequency hum that creates a vibration perfect for loosening tight shoulder muscles. Listen to that hum now. It is a B-flat, a low, resonant B-flat. The same note, coincidentally, as the hum of a microwave oven warming up a bowl of soup, or the sound of a large bumblebee that has forgotten where the flower is. Inside this ship, there is the Almanac. Let us look at the device itself. It is not a sleek, shiny tablet of glass. It is a chunky, sturdy device with rounded corners, encased in a rubberized plastic that feels reassuringly grippy. It has the aesthetic appeal of a 1980s calculator or a very well-made toaster. The screen does not emit blue light, which keeps you awake. It emits beige light. This is a spectrum of light specifically calibrated to remind the retina of old parchment, milky tea, and sunset on a smoggy day. The Almanac contains all the knowledge in the known universe, provided that knowledge is not too exciting. It filters out exclamation marks. It automatically deletes words like urgent, danger, or sail ends soon. Instead, it focuses on the data that other encyclopedias leave out. The texture of moss on a specific rock, the boiling point of dust, the alphabetical list of asteroid names that begin with the letter Q. It is a book dedicated to the art of being boring, and tonight we shall read from Volume 1, Chapter 1, The Nothingness. Most people assume that space is empty. This is technically true, but empty is a lazy word. There are many different types of empty. There is the emptiness of a pocket when you have lost your wallet. That is a stressful emptiness. There is the emptiness of a fridge on the day before grocery shopping. That is a hungry emptiness. But the emptiness of space, that is a luxury emptiness. It is clean. It is uncluttered. It is the ultimate minimalist design. Consider the vacuum outside the hull. It contains absolutely nothing. No pollen to make you sneeze. No traffic to make you honk. No mosquitoes. No people asking if you have 5 minutes to complete a survey about your recent customer service experience. It is just peace. The molecules out there are spaced so far apart that they can go their entire existence without ever bumping into another molecule. They are the ultimate introverts. They float in the dark, perfectly content, enjoying the solitude. We are passing through a cloud of these introverted molecules right now. They are gently flowing over the hull of the ship. If you listen very, very closely, you can't hear them, because that is the point. They are respecting your privacy. To fully appreciate the profound silence of the sector of Eternal Tuesday, we must stop looking at the stars for a moment and look instead at the interior of the ship. Specifically, we must look into Cabin 4. Cabin 4 is currently occupied by a human, or at least a being so genetically similar to a human that the difference is merely a matter of filing the correct paperwork. His name is Barnaby Fisk. Barnaby is not a space marine. He is not a galactic diplomat. He is not a rebel leader destined to overthrow a corrupt empire. If Barnaby were to try and overthrow an empire, he would likely start by writing a strongly worded letter to the suggestion box and then immediately apologize for his tone. Until very recently, Barnaby was a junior assistant data arranger for a mid-sized corporation known as United Adhesive Logistics. His specific role was in the fruit division. For 20 years, Barnaby was the man responsible for deciding which font size should be used on the tiny oval stickers found on bananas. It was a job that required a high level of concentration and a frighteningly low level of ambition. Every Tuesday, Barnaby would attend the Committee of Sticker Integrity. They would sit in a grey room and debate the merits of Arial versus Helvetica for hours on end. Barnaby preferred Helvetica. His supervisor, a man named Mr. Glumbottom, preferred Arial. The resulting conflict was a cold war of passive-aggressive emails that lasted for a decade. But eventually, Barnaby found that even the high-octane world of fruit labels was becoming too frantic. The oranges were becoming too demanding, the pears were ripening aggressively, the paperwork required to approve a new adhesive for a kiwi fruit, which is notoriously fuzzy and difficult to stick things to, had tripled in volume. And so, on a rainy afternoon, Barnaby did what any sensible sentient being would do when faced with the crushing weight of mild administrative stress. He did not panic. He simply stood up, placed his stapler gently on his desk, walked out of the building, and booked a ticket on a ship that promised to go nowhere in particular, very slowly. He chose the Class 4 sleeper Sloop because the brochure promised that the engines ran on reluctance. Barnaby felt he had a lot of reluctance to give. He was currently sitting in the ship's primary observation bubble, trying to decide if he was relaxed yet. It was a difficult thing to gauge. Barnaby had spent so much of his life in a state of low-level vibration that actual relaxation felt slightly suspicious, like a quiet room that was about to be interrupted by a fire alarm. He shifted in his chair. The chair was lined with polite fur, a material that had been genetically engineered to be supportive but not clingy. Barnaby felt that the fur was perhaps being a little too understanding. It seemed to be hugging his lower back with a level of intimacy he hadn't formally agreed to. He looked down at the mug in his hands. He had asked the ship's Nutrimatic dispenser for tea. Specifically, he had asked for tea Earl Grey, hot. The machine, which had been busy calculating the value of pi to the last decimal place just for fun, had been rather annoyed by the interruption. It had produced a cup filled with a liquid that was almost but not quite entirely unlike tea. Barnaby took a sip. He grimaced. It tasted of lukewarm water and a distinct hint of a 9-volt battery. He didn't mind, really. In fact, he found it oddly comforting. It was the taste of a machine doing its best and failing slightly. Barnaby could relate to that. He had often felt like a machine doing its best and failing slightly, especially during the great avocado sticker crisis of 2014. He wondered if Mr. Glumbottom had noticed he was gone. He imagined Glumbottom standing by his empty desk, holding a sheet of Arial font stickers, looking confused. The thought gave Barnaby a small, warm feeling in his chest, which he initially mistook for heartburn, but then realized was actually contentment. He looked out of the viewport. Outside, the nebula of beige was drifting past. It was a vast, formless cloud of dust. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't swirling dynamically. It wasn't collapsing into a star. It was just hanging there, taking up space, completely unbothered by its own lack of purpose. Barnaby felt a deep, spiritual connection to the dust. He glanced at the almanac resting on his knee. He had been reading about lost items. He tapped the screen with a finger that was still slightly sticky from a cinnamon bun. He wondered if he should go to the pantry. The pantry was down the hall. That involved walking. Walking involved effort, and effort seemed contrary to the spirit of the ship. On the other hand, he vaguely remembered packing a tin of biscuits. And not just any biscuits, chocolate-covered ones, the sort of biscuits that required a structural analysis before dunking. Barnaby sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh that seemed to start in his ankles and work its way up. He decided that he would go. But not yet. Maybe in 5 minutes, or possibly 10. He took another sip of his battery-flavored tea and let the silence of the Tuesday sector wash over him like a warm, damp towel. Barnaby looked down at his mug. The situation was becoming critical. The tea, which had started its life as a disappointing grey liquid, was now developing a skin. It was a sad, wrinkly film that reminded Barnaby of the carpet in the waiting room of his dentist back on Earth. He knew what he had to do. The tea required structural support. It required a biscuit. Specifically, it required a galactic digestive. Barnaby had packed a tin of them before leaving. They were sturdy, reliable biscuits that tasted primarily of cardboard and nostalgia. They were exactly what he needed. The problem, however, was physics. The biscuits were in the pantry. Barnaby was in the chair. Between the chair and the pantry lay the corridor. Barnaby calculated the distance. It was approximately 40 feet. In the grand scale of the universe, which the Almanac had already assured him was ridiculously big, 40 feet was statistically irrelevant. It was nothing. But to Barnaby, who had just spent 45 minutes moulding the polite fur into a shape that perfectly accommodated his lower lumbar region, 40 feet felt like a marathon run through treacle. He sighed. He placed his hands on the armrests. He pushed. The chair let out a soft pneumatic whoosh of air, a sound that Barnaby interpreted as a noise of profound disappointment. It was the sound of a piece of furniture feeling rejected. "I'm sorry," Barnaby whispered to the upholstery. "I'll be back. Keep it warm." He stood up. His knees clicked, a dry, snapping sound that seemed to echo around the silent room. Barnaby winced. He hoped the ship's sensors hadn't picked that up. He didn't want the medical computer sending him a pamphlet on joint supplements. He turned toward the door and began to walk. Barnaby's walk was a unique shuffle, necessitated by his mag-grip slippers. Because the ship's gravity was artificial and occasionally prone to drift, the slippers were designed to stick slightly to the floor. This meant every step required a deliberate peel and stick action. Shpop, shpop. He stepped into the corridor. It was a long, curved tunnel stretching away into the distance, lit by the same non-threatening beige light that illuminated the rest of the ship. Barnaby liked the corridor. It was uncomplicated. It had no windows, which meant he didn't have to look at the infinite void and worry about his place in it. He counted the wall panels as he walked. Panel 1, Panel 2, Panel 3. He found himself wondering about the person who had designed these panels. He decided his name was probably Jeff. Jeff, the panel designer. Barnaby imagined Jeff as a man who owned a lot of cardigans and had strong opinions about the color taupe. Barnaby felt a sudden intense kinship with Jeff. If Jeff were here right now, Barnaby felt they could have a very pleasant conversation about the merits of silence. Barnaby was approaching panel 15 when he saw it. An obstacle. About 10 feet ahead, blocking the center of the hallway, was the ship's cleaning unit. It was a Dustmite Mark V. The Mark V was a small domed robot that looked like an overturned soup bowl with wheels. It was currently spinning in a slow, confused circle, making a sound like a wheezy accordion. Whir-click, whir-wheeze. Barnaby froze. Social anxiety flared in his chest. He knew, logically, that the robot was a machine. It did not have feelings. It did not have eyes. But the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation had programmed all their service robots with a friendly personality subroutine, which Barnaby found deeply harrowing. He didn't want to talk to the vacuum cleaner. He was wearing his dressing gown. He hadn't brushed his hair. He wasn't ready for small talk. He considered his options. Option A, turn back, abandon the biscuits, drink the sad tea alone. Option B, try to squeeze past the robot against the wall and hope it doesn't notice him. He chose option B. He pressed his back against the beige paneling. He sucked in his stomach, which didn't go in quite as far as it used to in his 20s, and began to sidle. Slide, slide, slide. The robot stopped spinning. Its little sensor dome swiveled. It pointed directly at Barnaby. Barnaby held his breath. He tried to think wall-like thoughts. I am a panel, he thought. I am structural. I am not a source of crumbs. The robot rolled forward. It stopped inches from Barnaby's slipper. It made a cheerful electronic chirping noise. Then, a synthesized voice, which sounded suspiciously like a game show host who had just woken up from a nap, spoke. "Greetings, entity," the robot said. Barnaby closed his eyes. "I detect sadness," the robot continued, "and wool." Barnaby didn't reply. He hoped that if he stayed silent, the robot would assume he was a coat rack. "Would you like me to hum?" the robot asked. "I have been programmed with 3 popular folk songs, and the sound of a hairdryer." Barnaby opened one eye. The robot was vibrating with eagerness. It really wanted to help. Barnaby felt a wave of guilt. He couldn't just ignore it. That would be rude, and Barnaby Fisk was many things, but he was not rude to appliances. "No, thank you," Barnaby whispered, looking strictly at the ceiling. I'm just passing through. Good work. Carry on." The robot processed this. "Acknowledged," it said, sounding slightly dejected. "I shall return to," hovering aggressively near the skirting board. The robot beeped, turned around, and rolled away, bumping gently into the wall as it went. Barnaby let out a breath he felt he had been holding since Tuesday. He peeled himself off the wall. He was safe. The pantry door was just ahead. He approached it. Unlike the robot, the pantry door was not chatty. It was a heavy, sliding mechanism that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Barnaby stood in front of it. He waited for it to open. It didn't move. He waved a hand. Nothing. He did a small jump. Nothing. Barnaby realized with a sinking feeling that the door was asleep. He cleared his throat. Ahem. The door shuddered. It let out a long, hydraulic hiss that sounded exactly like a teenager being asked to empty the dishwasher. Pfft! Slowly, grudgingly, the metal panels slid apart. And there, bathed in the cool light of the refrigerator unit, was the Holy Grail. The tin. The Galactic Amalgamated Biscuit Company. Barnaby stepped inside. He had made it. He selected a biscuit. It was a vanilla wheel, a classic choice. Sturdy enough to withstand transit, yet porous enough to absorb a significant amount of tea without structural collapse. He held it gently between thumb and forefinger, treating it with the same reverence a museum curator might show a Ming vase. The lid of the tin was replaced. The heavy metal click echoed in the small room. Now came the return leg. He stood up, brushing a microscopic speck of dust from his dressing gown. The biscuit was exposed. It was vulnerable. The air currents in the corridor were negligible, but one could never be too careful. A sudden draft could, theoretically, dislodge a crumb, and he was not prepared to deal with the paperwork involved in losing a crumb in international airspace. He exited the pantry. The door hissed shut behind him. Pfft, sounding relieved to be rid of the social interaction. He began the shuffle back. Shh, bop, shh, bop. The corridor seemed longer this time. Perhaps it was the burden of cargo. He kept his eyes fixed on the destination, cabin 4. He tried to keep his arm perfectly level. He imagined he was a waiter in a high-end restaurant during an earthquake. Focus, balance, serenity. Halfway down the hall, the cleaning robot was still there. It had given up on cleaning and was now just gently bumping against the skirting board in a rhythmic, meditative fashion. Bump, beep, bump, beep. He didn't stop this time. He didn't even slide against the wall. He walked past it with the quiet confidence of a man holding a carbohydrate. The robot chirped as he passed, a sound that might have been hello, or possibly you dropped nothing. He ignored it. His mind was on the tea. Was it still hot? Or had it descended into that tepid, lukewarm zone where it is no longer a beverage, but merely wet? Only time would tell. He reached the door to cabin 4. It slid open silently. The room was exactly as he had left it. The nebula of beige was still drifting past the window. The polite fur chair was still holding the shape of his body, waiting patiently for his return. He approached the table. The mug was there. He peered into the grey depths. A skin had formed, a thin, tragic film on the surface. But steam, faint, wispy, determined steam, was still rising. It was salvageable. He sat down. The chair sighed, welcoming him back into its fuzzy embrace. It adjusted its lumbar support, pushing gently against his lower back as if to say, "There you go. No need to move again for at least 3 hours." He settled. He transferred the biscuit to his left hand. He picked up the mug with his right. The moment of truth. He dipped. The vanilla wheel broke the surface tension of the tea. He held it there. This was the dangerous part. The dunking event horizon. Hold it too long, and the biscuit dissolves, falling into the mug to create a sludge at the bottom that is impossible to drink with dignity. Pull it out too soon, and the biscuit is merely damp, which is the culinary equivalent of a disappointing handshake. He counted internally. 1, 2, 3. He felt the weight of the biscuit change. It was becoming heavy, saturated. It was time. He lifted. The biscuit held. It was sodden, grey, and threatening to break, but it held. He took a bite. It tasted of vanilla. It tasted of battery tea. It tasted of success. He chewed slowly, letting the warm, mushy sweetness dissolve. It wasn't the best biscuit he had ever eaten. It wasn't even in the top 50. But it was here. And he was here. And for the next 10 minutes, that was all that mattered. He took another sip of tea. He leaned his head back against the headrest. The anxiety about the fruit labels, the font sizes, the passive-aggressive emails. It all felt very far away. Here, there was only the hum, the B-flat hum, low, steady, constant. He closed his eyes, and he listened. Barnaby was just considering the structural integrity of a second biscuit when the lighting in the cabin changed. It did not flash. Flashing implies urgency, and the Class 4 sleeper Sloop did not recognize urgency as a valid concept. Instead, the beige light simply deepened. It shifted from late afternoon office to early evening library. Barnaby stopped chewing. He felt a change in the vibrations of the chair. The polite fur, which had been hugging his lumbar region with the enthusiasm of a lonely aunt, suddenly relaxed. It flattened itself out, as if preparing for a nap. Then, the ship's address system crackled to life. The speakers, which were hidden behind panels of acoustic wool, let out a soft, static fizz. A voice spoke. It was not the crisp, robotic voice of the navigation computer. It was a voice that sounded like it was speaking through a mouthful of marshmallows, possibly while wearing a very thick velvet smoking jacket. "Attention, passenger," the voice mumbled. "This is your, well, let's call it your captain, though I'm really just a subroutine with a hat on." Barnaby leaned forward. "We have arrived at our destination. Please ensure your seat back is in the reclined position. In fact, if you can slump, that would be preferable. The upright position is considered visually aggressive in this sector." The voice paused to yawn. It was a long, digital yawn that seemed to last for 30 seconds. "We will be docking shortly, or whenever gravity gets around to it. There is no rush. The ground isn't going anywhere." The intercom clicked off. Barnaby looked out of the observation port. The nebula of beige, his companion for the last several hours, had vanished. In its place was a planet. Barnaby pressed his face against the cool, multi-layered glass. He had seen planets before. He had seen the steel cities of Coruscant Minor. He had seen the magma lakes of the fire pits. This was different. From orbit, Hypnagogia Prime did not look like a piece of geology. It looked like upholstery. It was a soft, pale lavender color, swirled with clouds of creamy white. It looked fuzzy. Barnaby squinted. It really did look fuzzy. It looked less like a celestial body and more like a very large, expensive dryer ball that had been left floating in the cosmos. He felt the ship decelerate. Usually, landing a spacecraft is a violent affair involving retro rockets, heat shields, and a great deal of rattling cutlery. But the Class 4 sleeper sloop didn't believe in violence. It utilized a landing technique known as the feather fall protocol. Barnaby felt his stomach do a slow, gentle somersault. The ship wasn't fighting gravity. It was negotiating with it. It was drifting downward like a leaf on a windless Tuesday. Down, down, gently spinning. He watched the surface get closer. There were no cities. There were no highways. There were no billboards advertising fruit stickers or adhesive solutions. There were just rolling hills. And the Almanac had been right. They really did look like dunes of soft linen. Barnaby felt a pang of worry. What if I land on a crease, he thought. That would be untidy. A gentle thump. It was barely a noise. It was the sound of a heavy book being closed in a quiet room. The ship settled. The engines sighed once, a long descending note, and then went silent. Barnaby sat there. He waited for the fasten seatbelt sign to turn off. Then he remembered there were no seatbelts because the ship assumed that if you fell out of your chair, you probably wanted to be on the floor anyway. He stood up. His knees clicked, but quietly this time, out of respect for the planet. He tightened the belt of his dressing gown. It was a ceremonial tightening. He was an explorer now, a pioneer of the nap. He picked up his mug, now empty, and placed it in the sink. He picked up his towel. One should never walk on a new planet without a towel. It was useful for drying one's feet, or for waving as a flag of surrender if the local wildlife proved to be too energetic. He walked to the airlock. The airlock door was a large circular slab of brushed steel. Barnaby stood in front of it. He waited. Usually, airlocks hissed. They banged. They released jets of steam to look dramatic. This airlock simply dissolved. The metal panels slid silently into the walls, retreating with a soft shh sound, revealing the gangway. Barnaby stepped out onto the metal ramp. He looked down. It was not a steep descent. The ship had knelt down, lowering its belly to the ground so he wouldn't have to strain his calves. He took the first step. Clang. He took the second step. Clang. And then he stepped onto the surface. Barnaby closed his eyes, anticipating the ground. He expected dirt. He expected rock. He expected the crunch of gravel. What he got was a squish. A firm, supportive, dignified squish. He looked down at his feet. His mag-grip slippers were sinking about an inch into the surface. It wasn't grass. It wasn't mud. It was moss, but not the damp, scratchy moss of earth that ruins your picnic trousers. This was deep, dry, velvet moss. It was the color of sage tea. It sprang back under his toes with a polite resilience. Barnaby took a breath. He inhaled deeply through his nose. The air hit his lungs. It didn't smell of ozone or fuel or the metallic tang of spaceports. It smelled of vanilla and old paper and faint, distant wood smoke. It was the smell of a used bookstore that also sold high-end pastries. He opened his eyes and looked around. The landscape stretched out in every direction, soft and undulating. There were no sharp edges. The Almanac had promised this. Even the mountains had been sanded down by the gentle winds of apathy until they were merely large, inviting mounds. Barnaby felt his shoulders drop 3 inches. The light was strange. There was no blinding sun. There was no harsh glare. The star of this system hung low on the horizon, bathed in a perpetual golden haze. It was permanently set to late afternoon. It was the golden hour that photographers on Earth waited all day for, except here it lasted for eternity. Barnaby began to walk. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't have a map. He didn't have a compass. But he suspected that on Hypnagogia Prime you couldn't really get lost. You could only become temporarily misplaced in comfort. He walked past a grove of trees. He stopped to examine them. They weren't made of wood. The trunks seemed to be composed of tightly rolled felt. The leaves were not crisp or green. They were large, fluffy pads that looked suspiciously like memory foam. A gentle breeze blew through the grove. The leaves didn't rustle. They flumped. Flump, flump, flump. Barnaby smiled. He liked the word flump. It was a good word. He continued his trek. About 50 yards from the ship he encountered a local. Resting on a large, mossy boulder, which looked more like a beanbag chair that had fossilized, was a creature. Barnaby froze. It was a bureaucratic sloth moth. He had read about them in the Almanac, but seeing one in person was a different matter. It was about the size of a badger. It was covered in thick grey fur that looked like it hadn't been brushed since the dawn of time. It had large, soulful eyes that were currently half closed. And, tucked under one arm, it held a stone tablet that looked like a clipboard. Barnaby stood very still. He didn't want to startle it. The sloth moth slowly turned its head. The movement was glacial. It took 10 seconds for the creature's nose to rotate 45 degrees. It looked at Barnaby. Barnaby looked at it. He felt a flash of old anxiety. Was this customs? Did he need a visa? Did he have to declare the biscuits he had eaten? He instinctively reached for a pocket to find a pen, then remembered he was wearing a dressing gown. The sloth moth stared at him. Then it raised one paw. Slowly, painfully slowly. Barnaby watched, mesmerized. The paw rose inch by inch, defying gravity with sheer lack of enthusiasm. It reached shoulder height. The sloth moth waved, once. A tiny, lethargic flap of the wrist. Then, exhausted by the effort, it let its arm drop back onto the moss with a soft thud. It sighed. It was a sigh that contained the weight of 1,000 cancelled meetings. Barnaby realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out. There were no forms to fill out. There was no font to choose. The sloth moth didn't care about him. It had already gone back to staring at a particularly interesting patch of lichen. Barnaby nodded respectfully to the creature. "Good afternoon," he whispered. The sloth moth did not reply. It was busy existing. Barnaby moved on. He felt the gravity pulling at him. On Earth, gravity felt like a burden. It was a force that dragged you down, made your grocery bags heavy, and made climbing stairs a chore. Here, gravity felt different. It felt like a support. It felt like the planet itself was holding him up by the knees, whispering, "Why walk when you could sit? Why sit when you could lie down?" Barnaby found a spot near a small stream. He approached the water's edge. The liquid flowing in the stream was dark and glossy. It moved with a slow, hypnotic viscosity. It didn't babble. Babbling requires energy. It murmured. It made a sound like blorp, blorp, glug. Barnaby sat down on the bank. He adjusted his dressing gown, smoothing the fabric over his knees. He tested the moss with his hand. It was perfect. It was cool, but not cold. Soft, but not sinking. He lay back. The ground conformed to his spine instantly. He stared up at the sky. The clouds above him were stationary. They were the cloud auditors he had read about. They were perfectly shapeless. Not a single one looked like a bunny or a castle or a face. They were just billowy blobs of nothing. It was the most relaxing sky he had ever seen. His brain, usually so loud with questions, finally went quiet. He tried to think about the fruit labels. He tried to worry about whether Arial was truly a superior font for a banana. But the thoughts slipped away, dissolved by the vanilla air. He closed his eyes. He was Barnaby Fisk. He was on a planet of cushions. And it was Tuesday. It would always be Tuesday. Chapter 2. The Unreasonable Deadline. And that, he thought, as the golden darkness gently folded over him, is perfectly adequate. Barnaby Fisk opened his eyes. He had slept for exactly 42 minutes. He felt rested. He felt rejuvenated. He felt that his soul had been taken out, dry-cleaned, and pressed into a neat, crisp shape. He sat up on the moss, ready to contemplate the existence of the nearby stream. But the stream was no longer murmuring. The stream was bubbling violently, as if someone had just turned the heat up to boil. Barnaby frowned. That's odd, he thought. Water doesn't usually panic. Then he noticed the sky. The beautiful, golden, late-afternoon sky of Hypnagogia Prime was changing. The soft lavender clouds were not drifting. They were scattering. They were fleeing the horizon like sheep who had just spotted a wolf. The color of the sky shifted from comforting amber to a color that the Almanac would technically classify as, oh dear God, red. Barnaby stood up. His mag-grip slippers unlatched from the moss with a worried pop. He looked at the sloth moth on the boulder. The creature was awake. Its eyes were wide open. It was frantically trying to dig a hole with its clipboard. "Excuse me," Barnaby said. "Is this normal weather?" Before the moth could answer, the noise arrived. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't a B-flat. It was a sonic boom. A noise so loud, so rude, and so devoid of manners that it knocked Barnaby's towel right off his shoulder. Barnaby covered his ears. Above him, the atmosphere tore open. A ship descended. This was not a Class 4 sleeper sloop. This was not a vessel designed for comfort. It was a jagged black wedge of metal covered in spikes, antennas, and what looked remarkably like very large guns. On the side of the hull, painted in aggressive, jagged letters, was the name, The Unreasonable Deadline. Barnaby stared. That, he noted dryly, does not look like room service. The black ship didn't land gently. It didn't negotiate with gravity. It slammed into the soft earth about 50 yards away, crushing a grove of memory foam trees. Steam hissed from the landing gear. A ramp slammed down. Barnaby took a step back. He tightened his dressing gown. It felt woefully inadequate as armor. From the smoke and steam, a figure emerged. It was a robot, but not a friendly dusting robot. This robot stood 7 feet tall. It was made of chrome and bad attitude. It had 4 arms, and each arm was holding a clipboard made of solid iron. It stomped down the ramp. It scanned the area with a burning red laser eye. The laser swept over the sloth moth, who fainted. The laser swept over the moss. The laser locked onto Barnaby. The robot marched up to him, stopping inches from his nose. It smelled of burnt photocopier toner and justice. "Identity confirmation required," the robot bellowed. Its voice sounded like a chainsaw cutting through a filing cabinet. Barnaby swallowed. I am Barnaby. Barnaby Fisk." The robot's eye flashed. "Barnaby Fisk. Formerly of United Adhesive Logistics? Fruit Division?" Barnaby blinked. "Yes. I resigned technically, but—" The robot dropped all 4 heavy clipboards onto the moss. "You are under arrest." Barnaby's jaw dropped. "Arrest? For what? I haven't done anything. I've just been sitting here. I dunked a biscuit. Is that a crime?" The robot leaned in. "You are charged with grand theft reality." "I beg your pardon?" "According to galactic records," the robot screamed, "you are in possession of the golden sticker of infinity." "The what?" "The sticker, the prototype, the one sticker that never falls off." The robot pointed a metal finger at Barnaby's chest. "It was missing from the archives. You were the last person to access the vault. The Emperor of the Galaxy wants his sticker back. He has a very important poster that keeps curling at the corners." Barnaby's mind raced. He remembered his last day. He remembered clearing out his desk. He remembered grabbing a sheet of reject stickers just to use for labeling his boxes. He remembered one shiny gold sticker that seemed unusually sticky. He had stuck it on the back of his almanac just to keep the battery cover on. He looked down at the almanac in his hand. He turned it over. There, on the battery cover, was a small, oval, golden sticker. It pulsed with a strange, cosmic light. "Oh," Barnaby whispered. "That one." The robot extended a massive mechanical claw. "Surrender the adhesive, citizen, or prepare to be expedited." "Expedited?" Barnaby squeaked. "Where?" "To the vortex of immediate consequences." Barnaby looked at the robot. He looked at the angry ship. He looked at his peaceful, ruined nap spot. He realized 2 things simultaneously. 1, he was about to go on a very long trip. 2, he had left his tea on the rock. "Wait," Barnaby cried. "I need to pack. I'm in a dressing gown." "There is no time for textiles," the robot roared. The claw clamped around Barnaby's waist. He was hoisted into the air. His slippers dangled helplessly. "Put me down!" Barnaby shouted, sounding very British and very annoyed. "This is highly irregular. I haven't even finished my 42 minutes. "Your 42 minutes are up," the robot stated. "Now begins the era of overtime." The robot turned and marched back up the ramp, carrying a flailing, bathrobe-clad man under one arm. The ramp slammed shut. The engines of the unreasonable deadline roared to life, incinerating a patch of moss. The ship blasted off, tearing a hole in the beige clouds, and shot into the stars. Barnaby Fisk was gone, and the galaxy was about to find out exactly what happens when you interrupt a man who just wanted a quiet cup of tea. Chapter 3. Holding Cell 4B, current wait time, eternity. Barnaby landed on the floor. It was not moss, it was linoleum, cold, hard, grey linoleum that smelled of despair and floor polish. He scrambled to his feet, adjusting his dressing gown with as much dignity as a man in fuzzy slippers could muster. He looked around. He was in a small, square room. There were no bars. There were no chains. Instead, there was a row of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. They were orange. They were moulded into a shape that did not conform to the human spine, or indeed the spine of any vertebrate species currently known to science. In the center of the room was a low table covered in magazines. Barnaby glanced at the titles: Modern Blaster Monthly, Advanced Filing Strategies, and Reader's Digest, Combat Edition. Barnaby realized with a sinking heart that he was not in a dungeon. He was in a waiting room. The sign on the wall confirmed it. Holding Cell 4B, please take a ticket. Current. Wait time. Eternity. He was not alone. Sitting in the far corner, occupying 3 chairs simultaneously, was a creature. It looked like a large heap of wet laundry that had gained sentience and grown several extra limbs. It was blue, rubbery, and appeared to be covered in small suction cup suckers. It was wearing a small bowler hat. It was reading a copy of Nebula Weekly upside down. Barnaby cleared his throat. Hello? The heap of laundry lowered the magazine. 5 eyes, arranged in a loose pentagon on what Barnaby assumed was a face, blinked at him. A mouth opened. It was located somewhere near the creature's chest. "Humph," the creature said. Its voice sounded like someone stirring macaroni and cheese. "Fresh meat or fresh vegetable. Hard to tell with you bipeds. You all look like peeled parsnips." Barnaby bristled slightly. "I am a human being, actually. My name is Barnaby." "I'm Qualtz," the creature gurgled. "Qualtz the Unfortunate, formerly of the sector of bad poetry." Qualtz shifted his bulk. The plastic chairs groaned in protest. "Take a seat, Barnaby. Don't take the middle one. It has gum on it. I think it's gum. It might be a carnivorous slug. I haven't poked it yet." Barnaby sat on the edge of the safest-looking chair. "So," Qualtz said, waving a tentacle vaguely, "what did they get you for? Murder? Arson? Loitering with intent to mope?" "Grand Theft Reality," Barnaby said, trying to sound tough. Qualtz whistled, a wet, sloppy sound. "Impressive. Did you steal a planet?" "I stole a sticker," Barnaby admitted. "Apparently, a golden one. The robot said it was the sticker of infinity. I just used it to keep the battery cover on my book." Qualtz's eyes widened, all 5 of them. "The infinity adhesive. You have it? The one sticker that holds the fabric of space-time together?" "Is that what it does?" Barnaby asked. "I thought it was just really sticky." "It's both," Qualtz said. "That's why it's dangerous. You realize that if you peel that sticker off, the universe might just fall apart, like a wet taco." Barnaby looked down at the almanac in his pocket. He patted the battery cover nervously. "I'll keep that in mind," he whispered. "And you? Why are you here?" Qualtz sighed. He deflated slightly, looking even more like a pile of damp towels. "I am a poetic criminal," Qualtz said. "I was arrested for unlicensed use of a metaphor." Barnaby blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Metaphors," Qualtz spat. Strictly regulated in this sector. The Galactic Literalism Council has banned them. They say metaphors are confusing. They say they waste time. I was in a bar on Beetlejuice 5. I told the bartender that my heart was a lonely hunter. Qualtz shook his head sadly. Next thing I knew, the literal police kicked down the door. They demanded to see the hunter's license. They searched my chest cavity for firearms. When I tried to explain that it was a figure of speech, they charged me with filing a false biological report and impersonating a safari. Barnaby nodded sympathetically. That sounds harsh. It gets worse, Qualtz burbled. I tried to plead my case. I told the judge he was barking up the wrong tree. They added unlicensed veterinary practice and arboreal vandalism to my charges. I'm looking at 300 years. Barnaby stared at the floor. So, he said, we are a sticker thief and a poet, trapped on a bounty hunter ship. Correct, Qualtz said, and we are heading to the vortex of immediate consequences. Also correct, Qualtz agreed. Nasty place. The consequences happen before you even do the thing. Very confusing for the grammar. Barnaby sighed. He leaned back in the plastic chair. It dug into his ribs. He missed the moss. He missed the vanilla air. He missed the B-flat hum. But then a thought occurred to him. A small, rebellious, fruit-label-adjusting thought. Qualtz? Barnaby said. Yes, Parsnip? Does this ship have a suggestion box? Qualtz laughed. It sounded like a drain unclogging. Oh, it has one. It's right there. He pointed a tentacle at a small, shredder-sized slot in the wall labeled Customer Feedback, Incinerator. Barnaby stood up. He tightened the belt of his dressing gown. Good, he said. I have a complaint to file. You're going to complain to the robot bounty hunter? Qualtz asked. The one with the laser eyes? I am, Barnaby said. He interrupted my tea. And if there is one thing a junior assistant data arranger knows how to do, it is how to clog a system with paperwork. Barnaby reached into his pocket. He pulled out the Almanac. He pulled out a pen. And he began to write. Chapter 4. Official Grievance, Form 7B/Z. Barnaby Fisk sat on the edge of the orange plastic chair. He smoothed the paper of the complaint form against his knee. He uncapped his pen. It was a standard-issue biro, the sort that usually resides in the Galactic Lost and Found. It had a chewed cap, and only worked if you held it at a 45-degree angle while sticking your tongue out slightly. Barnaby looked at the form. It was not a digital screen. It was paper, but not nice paper. It was government-grade paper, grey, slightly rough, and containing small flecks of wood pulp that looked like they were trying to escape. At the top of the page, in a font that shouted at the reader, were the words, Official Grievance Form 7B/Z, abridged version. Below that, in smaller letters, please complete in triplicate. Do not use metaphors. Do not use sarcasm. Do not weep on the ink. Barnaby took a deep breath. He began to read question 1. Question 1. Please state your name, species, and current state of solidity. Barnaby hesitated. Name, Barnaby Fisk. Species, human. Solidity. He poked his own arm. It was soft, owing to the biscuits, but definitely solid. He wrote, mostly solid. He moved to question 2. Question 2. Reason for grievance. Please check one of the following. Barnaby looked at the checkboxes. There were hundreds of them, printed in microscopic ink. He squinted. Option A. Unlawful disintegration. Option B. Lawful disintegration, but done rudely. Option C. Robot was too loud. Option D. Robot was not loud enough. Option E. The soup was cold. Option F. Existential dread. Barnaby scanned the list. He couldn't find interrupted while dunking a biscuit during a false arrest for stealing a cosmic sticker. He decided to check option C, robot was too loud. And for good measure, he also checked Option E, because the tea he had left behind was technically soup-like by now. Beside him, Qualtz let out a gurgle. The alien was trying to get comfortable on the 3 chairs. He had arranged his tentacles into a shape that looked like a tangled garden hose. "What are you writing, Parsnip?" Qualtz asked, one eye rotating independently to look at Barnaby's paper. "I am detailing the emotional distress caused by the interruption of my nap," Barnaby whispered, not looking up. "I am currently on subsection C, paragraph 4, the loss of the towel." Qualtz sighed. It sounded like a tire deflating in a swamp. "You are wasting your ink. The robot doesn't read, it scans. If it sees a single grammar error, it incinerates the page." Barnaby smiled, a tight, small data arranger smile. "That is why," Barnaby said, dotting an I with precise ferocity, "I am using the Oxford comma everywhere." He returned to the form. Question 3. Please describe the sound of your grievance using only vowels. Barnaby stared at the question. He looked at the pen. He looked at the wall. The wall was painted a shade of green that is usually found only in hospitals or on sandwiches that have been in a vending machine for 3 weeks. He thought about the sonic boom that had ruined his afternoon. He wrote, O-R-E. He felt a strange sense of calm washing over him. This was his element. The world outside might be full of laser eyes and bounty hunters and scary ships with spikes. But here, on this piece of rough grey paper, there were rules, there were margins, there were boxes to be ticked. He was no longer a prisoner. He was an administrator. He turned the page. The other side was blank, save for a single instruction in the center. Draw a picture of how you feel right now. Do not use stick figures. Barnaby looked at Qualtz. Qualtz was asleep. The alien was snoring. It wasn't a normal snore. It was a melodic, bubbling sound like a coffee percolator that had learned to sing opera. Bloop, whir, pop. Bloop, whir, pop. Barnaby listened to the rhythm. It was almost hypnotic. He looked at the blank space on the paper. He put the tip of the pen to the page, and slowly, carefully, he began to draw a biscuit. Chapter 5. The Vortex of Immediate Consequences. The ship known as the Unreasonable Deadline came to a halt. It did not stop with a screech of brakes or a blast of retro rockets. It stopped with a heavy, final thud, like a stack of encyclopedias being dropped onto a carpeted floor. The intercom crackled to life. The robot's voice, which previously sounded like a chainsaw, now sounded like a chainsaw that had been forced to attend a mandatory HR seminar on soft skills. "Attention detainees," it droned. "We have arrived at the vortex of immediate consequences. Please exit the vehicle in an orderly fashion. Do not run. Do not skip. Do not attempt to enjoy the scenery." The cell door slid open. Barnaby stood up. He tucked his grievance form, now featuring a very detailed drawing of a digestive biscuit, into the pocket of his dressing gown. He nudged Qualtz. "We're here," he whispered. Qualtz woke up with a start. His 5 eyes blinked in sequence. "Are we dead?" the alien gurgled. "No," Barnaby said. "I believe we are about to be processed." They shuffled out of the cell. They shuffled down the ramp. And they stepped out into the vortex. Barnaby had expected a black hole. He had expected a swirling maelstrom of cosmic energy that would tear his atoms apart. What he found was a lobby. A very, very large lobby. The vortex of immediate consequences was, in fact, a floating space station entirely dedicated to the art of administration. The walls were lined with wood paneling that was peeling slightly at the corners. The floor was covered in linoleum that had been polished to a shine so aggressive it was actually difficult to look at directly. And everywhere, stretching as far as the eye could see, were queues. There were queues for people who had stolen stickers. There were queues for people who had parked their spaceships in loading-only zones. There were queues for beings who had exceeded the legal limit of adjectives in a sentence. The air smelled of stale coffee, photocopier ozone, and the distinct musk-like scent of infinite patience. A small floating drone hovered up to Barnaby. It looked like a flying toaster. It printed out a small ticket. Barnaby took it. It read, "Number 4,982,101. He looked up at the digital display hanging above the main desk. It read, "Now serving, number 3. Barnaby let out a breath. To most heroes, this would be a nightmare. To a man who had spent 20 years debating font sizes for fruit labels, this was familiar territory. This was home. "Right," Barnaby said, adjusting his dressing gown belt. "We need to find the back of the line." They began to walk. They walked past the Department of Minor Infractions. They walked past the Bureau of Unnecessary Noise. They walked past a vending machine that contained a single lonely bag of crisps that had been wedged against the glass since the previous epoch. Finally, they found the end of the line. It was marked by a velvet rope. The rope was slightly frayed. Barnaby took his place behind a creature that looked like a large, sentient rock. He settled into his stance. The Q stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind the back, chin slightly lowered. It was a posture that said, "I am here. I am waiting, and I can do this all century." Qualtz slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was a puddle of blue rubber. "This is torture," Qualtz moaned. "The stillness, the silence, the lack of metaphors." "Shh," Barnaby whispered soothingly. "Just listen to the music." Above them, a speaker played a synthesized flute melody. It was slow. It was repetitive. It was the audio equivalent of a lukewarm bath. Barnaby closed his eyes. He felt the vibration of the station, a low, rhythmic thrum. He felt the presence of a million other beings, all standing still, all waiting, all suspended in the amber of bureaucracy. He thought about his ticket, number 4,982,101. It was a high number, a very high number. It meant he didn't have to do anything for a long, long time. He didn't have to explain himself. He didn't have to run. He didn't have to save the galaxy. He just had to wait for number 4. And then number 5. He felt his shoulders drop. He felt his breathing slow down to match the tempo of the bossa nova flute. He was safe here, buried in the queue, hidden in the crowd. Just another number, drifting slowly toward a desk that was light years away. He leaned back against the velvet rope. It gave way slightly, supporting him. He drifted, and the queue moved forward, 1 inch. Chapter 6. The Konami Code of Snacks. The queue had moved another inch. Barnaby Fisk shuffled forward. His slippers made a soft scuff-scuff sound on the linoleum. He stared at the back of the rock creature in front of him. He had now memorized every fissure, every mossy patch, and every geological imperfection on its surface. He checked his ticket again. Number 4,982,101. He looked at the counter. Now serving, number 3. He calculated the math. At the current rate of processing, he would reach the front of the line in approximately 4,000 years. This was convenient, as it gave him plenty of time to worry about whether he had left the immersion heater on back home. But Barnaby was thirsty and hungry. He remembered the vending machine they had passed earlier, the one with the lonely bag of crisps. He leaned over the velvet rope. The machine was only a few feet away. It stood against the wall, glowing with a sickly teal light. It was vibrating gently, as if shivering from the cold, bureaucratic air. "Qualtz," Barnaby whispered. "Save my spot." The pile of blue laundry on the floor gurgled. "I shall expand to fill the void," Qualtz promised, spreading a tentacle across the linoleum. Barnaby ducked under the rope. He approached the machine. Up close, it was even sadder than it had looked from a distance. The glass was smeared. The coils were empty. And there, in slot F4, was the bag, the void crisps, wedged against the glass, stuck, abandoned. Barnaby sighed. It wasn't a sigh of payment, it was just a sigh of recognition. He felt a deep spiritual connection to that bag. Then a voice spoke from the shadows beside the machine. "If you kick it," the voice said, smooth and relaxed, "it doesn't drop, but if you ask it politely about its childhood, it sometimes weeps and dispenses a soda." Barnaby froze. He knew that voice. He turned slowly. Leaning against the side of the vending machine, hidden from the robot guards by the shadows, was a man. He was wearing a trench coat that looked like it was made from a recycled bouncy castle, shiny, slightly squeaky, and aggressively cheerful. He had a towel folded into the shape of a swan draped over one shoulder. He was reading a copy of The Galaxy on $5 a day. "Jackson?" Barnaby whispered. The man looked up. He grinned. It was the grin of a man who had just found a loophole in the laws of physics. "Hello, Barnaby," Jackson said. "I see you're still wearing the dressing gown, a bold fashion choice. Very avant-garde." Barnaby blinked. "Jackson? What are you doing here, in the vortex?" Jackson Barnaby's old university roommate. The man who had once convinced a lecture hall full of students that gravity was just a societal construct, and that they could float if they just ignored it hard enough. 3 students had actually managed to hover for a few seconds before remembering they were heavy. "I'm queuing," Jackson said, gesturing vaguely with his book. "Or I was. I got bored. I decided to see if I could negotiate with the snacks." He tapped the glass of the machine. "This bag of crisps has a very interesting backstory, Barnaby. It's been stuck here since the great vending wars of Sector 7. "Jackson," Barnaby hissed, glancing at the security cameras. "We are prisoners. We have tickets. I am number 4,982,101. "Technically," Jackson corrected, "you are number 4,982,101. I am currently staff." Jackson pulled a lanyard from his pocket. It looked like it had been drawn in crayon, but it had a very official-looking stamp on it. "I convinced the drone at the entrance that I was the health and safety inspector for velvet rope tension. It let me right in." Barnaby stared at him. You lied to the administration?" "I didn't lie," Jackson said, hurt. "I merely improvised the truth." Jackson stood up. His coat squeaked. "But enough about ropes. We need to leave. This queue is moving far too slowly, and the background music is in a minor key, which is depressing my towel." "Leave?" Barnaby whispered. "How? The exit is past the desk. That's 4,000 years away." Jackson smiled. He pointed a thumb at the vending machine. "Barnaby, you of all people should know the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation. They cut corners." He tapped the metal frame. "This isn't just a snack dispenser. It's a service hatch. They ran out of money to build a real door, so they just installed a vending machine and hoped no one would notice." "You mean—" Barnaby looked at the stuck crisps. "That is the way out?" "Only if you know the password," Jackson said. He cracked his knuckles. He stepped up to the keypad. "Watch closely, Barnaby. This is the Konami code of snacks." Jackson began to type. A1, B2, C3. He paused. He leaned toward the microphone grill. "B flat," he hummed. The machine shuddered. The teal light flickered to green. The screen flashed. "Maintenance mode. Enjoy your freedom." With a soft click, the entire front of the machine swung open. The rows of empty coils moved aside, revealing a dark, cool tunnel lined with humming pipes. Barnaby looked at the tunnel. He looked at the queue. He looked at Qualtz, who was currently trying to eat a piece of gum off the floor. "Qualtz!" Barnaby hissed. "We're going." The blue alien looked up. "Do they have metaphors in there?" "They have stairs," Jackson lied again. "But they go down." "Sold," Qualtz burped. Jackson stepped into the machine. "After you, Barnaby. Welcome to the scenic route." Barnaby took one last look at the lobby. He looked at his ticket. He crumpled number 4,982,101 into a ball. He dropped it on the floor. And for the first time in his life, Barnaby Fisk cut the line. Chapter 7. The Chute of Expedited Departure. The inside of the vending machine did not smell like freedom. It smelled primarily of ozone, burning dust, and the ghosts of expired potato snacks. Barnaby Fisk scrambled through the darkness on his hands and knees. His mag-grip slippers, which were designed to adhere gently to floors to prevent drifting, were now proving to be a significant liability. Every time he lifted a foot, the metal floor of the maintenance tunnel tried to reclaim it with a sticky thwack. Thwack, scramble, thwack, scramble. "Move it, Barnaby!" Jackson's voice echoed from up ahead. "The maintenance cycle is about to start. You do not want to be in here when the automated crumb sweepers come online." "I am moving," Barnaby panted, his dressing gown tangling around his knees. "I am moving with as much agility as a middle-aged data arranger can muster." Behind them, Qualtz the alien was making a sound like a wet sponge being dragged across a blackboard. The poet was struggling to fit his bulk into the narrow tunnel. "This tunnel is a boa constrictor of steel," Qualtz gurgled. "It squeezes the breath from my—" "Don't finish that sentence," Barnaby hissed over his shoulder. "Remember the literalism police. If you say it squeezes the breath out of you, the universe might actually arrange for you to suffocate." "Right," Qualtz grunted. "The tunnel is surprisingly snug, like a very aggressive hug from a metal aunt." Barnaby took advantage of the slow pace to crawl up beside Jackson, who had paused to check a junction box with a device that looked suspiciously like a modified TV remote. "Jackson," Barnaby wheezed, wiping grease from his forehead with his sleeve. "A question." "Now is not the time for philosophy, Barnaby," Jackson said, tapping a button. "Although, arguably, it's never the time for philosophy in a ventilation shaft." "It's not philosophy," Barnaby snapped. "It's curiosity. I told you I'm here because of this sticker. Qualtz is here for unlicensed metaphors. But what did you do?" Jackson paused. He looked back at Barnaby, his grin illuminated by the blinking red light of the junction box. "Me? I'm here for aggravated irony." Barnaby blinked. "That's a crime?" "In Sector 9 it is," Jackson sighed, resuming his crawling. "I was at a dinner party hosted by the Guild of Literalists. Someone said, 'It's raining cats and dogs,' and I asked if they had checked the local poodle forecast. Next thing I knew, SWAT team through the skylight." Behind them, Qualtz let out a wet, terrified gurgle. "Irony is dangerous," Qualtz burbled. "It is the slippery banana peel on the pavement of language." "Exactly," Jackson called back. "They also tacked on a charge of premeditated whimsy because of my coat. Apparently, wearing a trench coat made of recycled bouncy castle is considered an act of rebellion against the beige regime." "So you're a political prisoner?" Barnaby asked, feeling a strange new respect for his old roommate. "I prefer the term stylistic martyr," Jackson corrected. "Now, hush. I think I found the drop." Suddenly the tunnel shook. A loud, mechanical clang reverberated through the metal walls, followed by the terrifying sound of a chainsaw revving up. Barnaby froze. He knew that sound. It was the voice of the robot. The unreasonable deadline. "Citizens!" The robot's voice roared from the vending machine entrance, amplified by the acoustics of the ventilation shaft. "You have failed to complete your transaction. Please return to the snack dispenser to receive your receipt and your incarceration." "Run!" Jackson yelled. Barnaby scrambled faster. The adrenaline kicked in, overriding his natural instinct to file a complaint about the noise. He rounded a corner, his shoulder bouncing off a bundle of thick cables labeled, "Do not touch. Load-bearing wires for reality." Ahead, the tunnel opened up into a cavernous vertical shaft. It was a service drop, stretching down into the infinite foggy depths of the station's bowels. Jackson Pree was standing on the edge, his bouncy castle trench coat flapping in the updraft. "Excellent," Jackson grinned, adjusting the towel on his shoulder. "A gravity chute." "A what?" Barnaby skidded to a halt, his slippers locking onto the grate. "A gravity chute. It's how they move the heavy paperwork from the Bureau of Complaints down to the incinerator," Jackson explained. "We just need to jump." "Jump?" Barnaby looked down. He couldn't see the bottom. He could only see passing clouds of steam and the occasional flying memo. "Is it safe?" "Safe?" Jackson laughed. Barnaby, you are currently holding the golden sticker of infinity in your pocket. You are a galactic fugitive. Safe was 3 chapters ago. From the tunnel behind them, a red laser light sliced through the darkness. The robot was coming. The thud, thud, thud of heavy metal feet grew louder. "I choose gravity!" Qualtz shouted. The blue alien tucked his tentacles in, curled into a ball that looked like a very large, soggy blueberry, and rolled off the edge. "Wee, gurgle splat!" His voice faded as he plummeted. Jackson turned to Barnaby. "Trust the physics, Barnaby, or at least trust the sticker." With a squeak of his vinyl coat, Jackson leaped into the void. Barnaby was alone. The red laser eye of the robot swept around the corner, illuminating Barnaby's terrified face. The robot squeezed its massive frame into the tunnel, its 4 arms clawing at the walls. "Halt!" the robot screamed. "I have a warrant for your adhesive." Barnaby looked at the robot. He looked at the drop. He thought about his tea, currently cold and abandoned on a rock in Hypnagogia Prime. He thought about the indignity of the queue. "I," Barnaby said, tightening the belt of his dressing gown, "am checking out." He stepped off the ledge. Usually falling is a terrifying experience involving wind, screaming, and a rapid approach to the ground. But this was a bureaucratic gravity chute. It did not believe in excessive speed. Barnaby did not plummet. He drifted. He fell at the speed of a feather settling on a library floor. It was the feather fall protocol, but applied to waste disposal. He floated down, his dressing gown billowing around him like a superhero cape made of terry cloth. He passed levels and levels of the station. He saw the Department of Redundancy Department. He saw the Bureau of Minor Infractions, where people were being fined for splitting infinitives. And then he saw the bottom. Qualtz and Jackson were waiting for him on a large mesh net suspended over a glowing blue reactor core. Barnaby landed on the net with a soft bounce. "Well done," Jackson clapped. "You handled that with adequate panic." "Where are we?" Barnaby asked, trying to untangle his foot from the netting. Jackson pointed to a massive blast door in front of them. It was covered in warning signs. "Authorized personnel only. Beware of dogma and emergency exit. Do not open unless universe is ending." "That," Jackson said, "is the hangar bay, and if my sources are correct, it's where they keep the impounded ships." "My ship?" Barnaby gasped. "The sleeper sloop?" "Possibly," Jackson shrugged, "but we might need something faster, something with a bit less beige." Barnaby patted his pocket. The Almanac was still there. The golden sticker pulsed warmly against his hip. He felt a sudden surge of something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't the urge to organize fruit labels. It was initiative. "Right," Barnaby said, pointing a slipper-clad foot at the blast door. "Let's steal a ride." Chapter 8. The Hangar of Misunderstood Vehicles. Barnaby Fisk stood before the blast door. It was a door of significant intimidation. It was 3 stories tall, made of reinforced titanium, and painted in a shade of industrial grey that suggested it had absolutely no sense of humour. Barnaby looked down at his slippers. They were fuzzy. They were brown. They were completely unsuited for storming a citadel. "How do we open it?" Barnaby asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast ventilation shaft. "I assume you have another code, or perhaps a stick of dynamite made from chewing gum." Jackson Pree shook his head. "Dynamite is too messy, and the code for this door changes every 6 minutes based on the fluctuating price of festive hats in the Andromeda sector. It's uncrackable." "So we are stuck?" Qualtz gurgled, looking despondent. "Not at all," Jackson smiled. "This is a government facility, Barnaby, and if there is one thing government facilities cannot resist, it is the appearance of official business." Jackson reached into the deep pocket of his bouncy castle trench coat. He pulled out a clipboard. It was a simple, plastic clipboard, but Jackson clipped a piece of blank paper to it, clicked a pen, and held it against his chest with an air of profound authority. "Watch and learn," Jackson whispered. He walked up to the camera lens mounted beside the door. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He simply held up the clipboard, tapped his watch, and rolled his eyes. It was the universal gesture for, I am late, I have paperwork, and if you don't open this door, I am going to make it your problem. The camera whirred, it focused on the clipboard. The door didn't beep, it didn't scan his retina. It simply recognized the terrifying power of a middle manager running behind schedule. With a groan of heavy hydraulics, the locking mechanism disengaged. Clunk, hiss, groan. The massive doors slid apart, revealing the hangar bay. Barnaby had expected a hive of activity. He had expected mechanics welding things, pilots running around, and fuel hoses hissing. What he found was a museum of silence. The hangar was vast. It stretched for miles, a cavernous cathedral of steel, and parked in neat, endless rows were hundreds of spaceships. But these were not the sleek, deadly ships of the Imperial Guard. These were the impounded ships, the rejects, the failures, the ships that had been towed away for violating the laws of physics, or perhaps just the laws of good taste. They walked down the central aisle. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet air, which smelled of old oil, cold metal, and stalled dreams. "Look at that one," Qualtz whispered, pointing a tentacle. To their left sat a ship that was perfectly spherical. It had no windows, no engines, and no doors. It looked like a giant metal ball bearing. "That," Jackson said, glancing at a plaque on the floor, "is the SS Introvert. It was designed by a species that really didn't want to meet anyone. It has excellent shields, but unfortunately, the pilot locked himself in from the inside and refused to come out. It's been parked here for 3 centuries. They continued walking. Barnaby felt the golden sticker pulsing against his hip. It was a warm, reassuring weight, like a hot water bottle in a pocket. He pulled out the almanac. He felt a sudden urge to know where he was. "I wonder if these ships are listed," Barnaby murmured. He tapped the screen. The beige light illuminated his face. He scrolled past planetary soil types and the history of the paperclip. He found a section titled, Appendix G, Vehicles You Should Probably Avoid. "Listen to this," Barnaby said, stopping in front of a ship that looked suspiciously like a giant flying armchair. He began to read. His voice took on that low, rhythmic cadence that he usually reserved for explaining the difference between adhesive grades. The Galactic Almanac notes that spaceship design is often a tug-of-war between engineering and ego. Occasionally, however, it is a tug-of-war between engineering and apathy. Before us lies the Mark V Procrastinator. Barnaby looked up at the ship. It was painted a non-committal shade of grey. The engines looked like they were slouching. He continued reading. The Procrastinator was built by the languid engineers of the Slow Zone. It features a revolutionary propulsion system known as the Eventually Drive. Unlike a hyperdrive, which folds space to get you there instantly, the Eventually Drive simply convinces the universe that you will get there eventually, so there is no need to rush. When the pilot engages the throttle, the ship does not accelerate. Instead, the ship's computer issues a series of polite excuses. It will say things like, "I just need to tidy the cabin first," or "I'm not really in the mood for light speed today, how about next Thursday?" The ship has never successfully left a spaceport. However, the pilots report that the seats are exceptionally comfortable and the onboard library is extensive. Barnaby looked at the ship with deep longing. "It sounds perfect," he whispered. "We could just sit in it and not go anywhere." "We need to go somewhere, Barnaby," Jackson said, gently taking the almanac from his hands and closing the cover. "Specifically, we need to go away." Jackson strode forward, his coat squeaking. "We need speed. We need stealth. We need something that screams, 'Don't look at me.'" He stopped. He pointed to a ship at the very end of the row. It was not large. It was not impressive. In fact, it looked like a collection of spare parts that were holding hands and hoping for the best. It was painted a chaotic mix of colors. One wing was red, the hull was yellow, and the landing gear appeared to be made of mismatched table legs. "Is that—" Barnaby squinted. "Is that a garbage scow?" "No," Jackson grinned. "That is the SS Unlikely Coincidence. "It looks terrible," Qualtz observed. "It looks like a mechanical salad." "It is terrible," Jackson agreed. "It utilizes the improbability-adjacent drive. It's a prototype. It relies on the scientific principle that if something is ugly enough, the universe will actively look the other way to avoid being offended." Jackson patted the hull. A piece of rust flaked off. "It is effectively invisible to radar, scanners, and anyone with a sense of aesthetic decency. It is the perfect getaway car." Barnaby looked at the mismatched ship. He looked back at the comfortable procrastinator. He sighed. "I suppose," Barnaby said, tightening his dressing gown, "that if we are going to be fugitives, we might as well look like we dressed in the dark." "That's the spirit." Jackson slapped a button on the side of the ship. A ramp descended. It creaked. It groaned. It sounded like a cello being dragged down a staircase. "All aboard," Jackson said. "Next stop, anywhere but here." Chapter 9. The Manual of Unhelpful Instructions. Barnaby Fisk stepped onto the bridge of the SS Unlikely Coincidence. He paused. He blinked. He adjusted his dressing gown. He had expected a bridge. He had expected sleek, curved consoles of white plastic, blinking lights of urgent blue, and perhaps a captain's chair made of ethically sourced, ergonomic leather. What he found looked more like the inside of a garage sale that had been organized by a chaotic magpie with a hoarding problem. The space was small, cramped, and aggressively cluttered. There were no sleek consoles. Instead, the primary flight controls appeared to be mounted on a series of mismatched tables that had been bolted to the deck plates. Barnaby examined the largest table. It was not made of wood, at least not any wood recognized by terrestrial botany. It was a slab of stubborn timber from the forests of the planet Obtuse. The Almanac, had Barnaby had time to consult it, would have noted that trees on Obtuse are sentient and famously uncooperative. They do not grow toward the light. They grow wherever they feel like, usually horizontally, just to trip people up. Stubborn timber is prized in spaceship construction, not because it is strong, but because it is chemically incapable of burning. If you set fire to it, the wood simply ignores the flames until they get bored and go out. This particular table still had the bark on it, which seemed to be scowling. The second table appeared to be a collapsible card table made of compressed doubt. It was trembling slightly under the weight of a heavy monitor, looking as though it wasn't entirely sure it wanted to be a table today. Barnaby looked at the pilot's chair. It was not a command seat, it was a recliner. Specifically, it was a Lazy E-Boy Mark IV gravity lounger. It was upholstered in a fabric known as retina-searing tartan. This fabric was originally developed by the Optical Warfare Division of the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation to disorient enemies, but it was found to be too comfortable, so it was sold to furniture outlets instead. The pattern, a clash of angry orange and violently mossy green, seemed to vibrate if you looked at it too long, creating a mild hallucination of a bagpipe player in distress. Stuffing was escaping from the left armrest in slow, white puffs, like a cloud trying to resign from its job. Above them, wires hung from the ceiling like vines in a technological jungle. These were not copper wires. These were thinking vines harvested from the silicon jungles of Circuit Prime. Thinking vines are semi-organic cables that grow their own electricity. However, they are prone to anxiety. Barnaby noticed that several of the vines were knotted together in a tight clump. This is a phenomenon known as a nervous tangle, which usually occurs when the ship is about to do something dangerous. And the smell. The air inside the ship did not smell of recycled oxygen and sterility. It smelled faintly of old curry, battery acid, and damp wool. It was the smell of a waiting room that hadn't been aired out since the previous millennium. "Cozy, isn't it?" Jackson Pree grinned, sweeping past Barnaby with his coat squeaking against the metal doorframe. "It has a certain rustic charm." "It looks like a fire hazard," Barnaby observed, stepping over a pile of rusted gears. "A flying fire hazard." "That is part of the stealth," Jackson said, leaping into the tartan recliner. He spun the chair around. It made a grinding noise. The sound was like a heavy stone being dragged across a blackboard. If a scanner looks at us, it doesn't see a spaceship. It sees a pile of debris that is miraculously maintaining cabin pressure. Now, strap in. Or hold on to something heavy. Qualtz the alien slithered onto the bridge. The blue, rubbery poet looked around with all 5 eyes, his bulk filling the doorway. There are no seats for non-bipeds, Qualtz gurgled sadly. He poked a finger at a stack of crates labeled dangerous wobbly things. You can be the airbag, Jackson suggested. Qualtz sighed, a wet, bubbling sound, and wedged himself into a corner between the crates and a fire extinguisher that looked like it had rusted shut in 1974. Barnaby looked for a seat. He found the co-pilot station. It was a stool. It was not wood. It appeared to be made of re-solidified sawdust composite. It was a material invented by a budget committee who wanted to see if they could make furniture out of mistakes. Barnaby sat down. The stool was hard. It lacked the polite fur of the sleeper Sloop. It was a stool of indifference. He looked at the dashboard in front of him. It was made of faux mica. Real formica is a plastic laminate. Faux mica is a substance quarried from the beige planets. It is naturally smooth, naturally ugly, and completely impervious to coffee stains, which it absorbs and wears like a badge of honor. The buttons themselves were a baffling collection. Some were toggle switches, some were sliders. One appeared to be a doorbell buzzer glued to the console with epoxy. Another button was simply labeled with a piece of masking tape that read, "Do not press unless you mean it." "Right," Jackson said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's light this candle. Barnaby, read the manual." Jackson reached under the recliner and pulled out a heavy, oil-stained book. He tossed it at Barnaby. Barnaby caught it. It felt greasy. The cover was torn, and the title was handwritten in marker pen. Operating Instructions for Prototype 7. If you are reading this, something has gone wrong. Barnaby opened the book. The pages were stiff with age. "Jackson," Barnaby said, his voice rising in pitch as he scanned the first page. "This isn't a technical manual. It's a collection of sticky notes pasted together." "Just find the ignition sequence," Jackson shouted, flipping switches on the dashboard. A windshield wiper on the main view screen started flapping aggressively. Thwack squeak, thwack squeak. It was wiping away absolutely nothing, as they were currently inside a dry hangar, but it was doing so with immense determination. Okay, Barnaby frantically flipped pages. Section 1, turning it on. Step 1, ensure the universe is not looking. Check, Jackson said. We are very ugly. No one wants to look at us. Step 2, Barnaby read. Depress the clutch of uncertainty. The what? The clutch of uncertainty. It says it is the red pedal on the left, but you have to press it while thinking about a time you weren't sure if you locked the front door. Jackson slammed his foot on a rusty pedal near the floor. He closed his eyes. He furrowed his brow. I am thinking about my laundry, Jackson yelled. Did I separate the whites? Did I use the gentle cycle? I don't know. I truly don't know. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a powerful roar. It sounded like a stomach growling in a cathedral during a quiet prayer. Gurgle, grumble, clank. It's working, Qualtz burped from the corner. The ship is feeling insecure. Outside the ship, the blast door to the hangar was fully open, and standing in the opening, silhouetted against the light of the corridor, was the robot, the unreasonable deadline. Its 4 arms were flailing. Its red laser eye was scanning the hangar with a terrifying, strobe-like intensity. It spotted them. It spotted the mismatched yellow and red hull of the unlikely coincidence. There you are, the robot's voice boomed, shaking the rivets of the ship. Prepare to be audited. The robot began to sprint. It didn't run like a human. It ran like a heavy industrial machine that had suddenly remembered it had an appointment. Heavy metal footsteps clanged against the deck plates. Clang, clang, clang. Jackson! Barnaby shrieked. It's coming! It has clipboards! Step 3! We need step 3! Read it! Barnaby squinted at the manual. The handwriting was terrible, scrawled in what looked like crayon. Step 3. Engage the improbability-adjacent drive by inserting a coin of indeterminate value. "I don't have change," Jackson yelled. "I spent it all on the vending machine." Barnaby patted his pockets. He had a dressing-gown belt. He had a towel. He had the almanac. He did not have currency. The robot was 50 yards away. It was charging its lasers. The red glow illuminated the faux mica dashboard. "I have a Form 99 for your arrest," the robot screamed, "and a parking ticket." "Wait!" Barnaby cried. "The sticker!" He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the almanac. He turned it over to the battery cover. He ripped the golden sticker off the back. It came away with a satisfying shh-tuck sound. It glowed with a blinding, celestial light. It was the only thing on the entire bridge that looked like it belonged in a science fiction story. "Stick it to the dashboard," Jackson yelled. "It's the sticker of infinity. It holds reality together. Maybe it can hold this ship together." Barnaby leaned forward. His hand trembled. He slapped the golden sticker onto the center of the faux mica dashboard, right between the doorbell button and the loose thinking vine. The effect was instantaneous. The ship didn't roar. It didn't blast off. It hiccuped. The lights on the bridge flared white. The engine noise shifted from a stomach rumble to a high-pitched whine, like a choir of mosquitoes singing in perfect harmony. The SS Unlikely Coincidence suddenly realized that it was, largely due to the sticker, the most important object in the room. And because it was important, it decided it was too good to be in a hangar. "Holding on!" Jackson laughed maniacally, gripping the shredded armrests of the tartan recliner. The view screen blurred. The approaching robot seemed to stretch. It elongated. Its chrome body turned into a long, angry smear of silver light. The hangar bay twisted. The walls bent inward like melting cheese. The laws of physics, realizing they were being ignored, decided to take a lunch break. There was a sensation of being squeezed through a very small tube of toothpaste. Barnaby felt his stomach arrive in his throat, realize it didn't like the view, and return to his abdomen. Qualtz let out a metaphor that was so profound, it instantly turned into a potted plant, and then back into an alien. Silence. The grinding noise stopped. The windshield wiper stopped. Barnaby opened one eye. The hangar was gone. The robot was gone. The view screen showed only the swirling beige clouds of the nebula. They were floating. They were silent. They were alive. "Well," Jackson said, patting the dashboard affectionately, narrowly missing the sticker. "That was vaguely successful." Barnaby slumped on his re-solidified sawdust stool. He looked at the golden sticker. It was stuck firmly to the console, pulsing slowly. He looked at Jackson. "Where are we?" Barnaby whispered. Jackson tapped a gauge that looked like a broken thermometer taped to the wall. "According to this," Jackson said, "we are currently nowhere, which is exactly where we want to be." He spun the tartan chair around to face Barnaby. "Welcome to life on the run, Barnaby Fisk. I hope you brought your towel." Chapter 10. The Graveyard of Missing Left Socks. The sensation of existing in nowhere was, Barnaby decided, remarkably similar to the sensation of having a heavy wool blanket dropped over one's head, while simultaneously falling down a spiral staircase holding a tray of drinks. The SS Unlikely Coincidence shuddered as it re-emerged into normal space. The mosquitoes in the engine room stopped singing in harmony and began to cough. The faux mica dashboard rattled violently, causing the ancient coffee stains to blur into new, exciting Rorschach tests. The golden sticker of infinity, currently stuck between the doorbell button and the loose wire, pulsed with a rhythm that felt suspiciously like a heartbeat in panic mode. "We have arrived!" Jackson shouted, fighting the tartan recliner as it tried to spin in 3 directions at once. Barnaby peeled his face off the re-solidified sawdust stool. He checked his limbs. He appeared to have the correct number, though his left ear felt like it was currently located on his right shoulder. "Arrived where?" he gasped, adjusting his dressing gown. "The manual said nowhere." It specifically promised a void. "Technically, yes," Jackson yelled over the noise of a thinking vine snapping above them. "But nature abhors a vacuum, and bureaucracy abhors an empty shelf. It turns out nowhere is actually full." Barnaby looked at the main view screen. His jaw dropped. They were not in a black void. They were not in a nebula. They were flying through a dense, swirling asteroid field, but the asteroids were not made of rock. "Is that—" Barnaby squinted as a massive, dark object tumbled past the cockpit window, blocking out the distant stars. "Is that a shoe?" "Correct." Jackson yanked the flight stick to the left, narrowly missing a drifting, washing machine-sized object that looked suspiciously like a hamster cage. "Welcome to the cosmic lost and found. This is where the wormholes dump everything the universe misplaces." Barnaby stared in horror. The space outside was a blizzard of domestic debris. It was a galaxy of the forgotten. There were billions of single, unmatched socks floating in sad, argyle nebulas. There were sunglasses that had vanished from the tops of heads. There were keys that had ceased to exist the moment they touched a table. There were Tupperware lids, millions of them, drifting in vast plastic shoals, searching eternally for bowls that were not there. "It's a graveyard," Qualtz gurgled from his corner, shielding his 5 eyes from the chaos. "A graveyard of minor inconveniences." Suddenly, the ship shuddered with a violent thud. The sawdust stool hopped 3 inches off the floor. "We've been hit," Barnaby cried, grabbing the faux mica console. "Was it a meteor, an asteroid?" "No." Jackson checked the sensors, which were currently displaying a picture of a sad face. "We were struck by a high-velocity festive fruitcake. The density is critical. It nearly breached the hull." Barnaby grabbed the Almanac. He felt the need for an explanation before he died of confectionery impact. He flipped frantically to Appendix L, the ballistics of baked goods. "The Almanac states," Barnaby read, his voice trembling, "that the holiday fruitcake is the densest form of matter known to science, second only to the ego of a Vogon captain. Because no one actually eats them, fruitcakes eventually develop their own gravity fields. They are the only known food source that can survive atmospheric re-entry, vacuum, and direct nuclear blasts. Warning: do not engage in conversation with a fruitcake. They are notoriously heavy conversationally." "Incoming!" Jackson screamed. Barnaby looked up. A swarm of silver objects had locked onto the ship's heat signature. They were small, they were pointy, and they were diving in formation. "Are those biros?" Barnaby asked. "Yes," Jackson yelled. "The migratory biros of Sector 7. They slip through wormholes in pockets to live a life of freedom in space, and they are territorial." Tink, 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 tink. The sound of 1,000 cheap ballpoint pens hitting the hull was like being inside a popcorn maker during an earthquake. They were trying to pierce the glass. They were trying to write aggressively on the windshield. "Evasive maneuvers." Jackson slammed his foot on the clutch of uncertainty. "Barnaby, I need you to confuse the targeting computer." "How?" "Press the button of Do Not Press." "But the sticker says—" "Press it. We are being hunted by stationery." Barnaby reached out. His finger hovered over the button masked with tape. He closed his eyes. He thought of his quiet life. He thought of his fruit labels. He pressed the button. The ship did not fire a weapon. Instead, the SS Unlikely Coincidence suddenly deployed its primary defense mechanism. It became extremely slippery. The hull began to exude a thick, shimmering layer of quantum grease. It was a substance synthesized from the sweat of a politician trying to explain a scandal. It was chemically frictionless. The swarm of biros skidded off the windshield. The fruitcakes bounced away harmlessly, spinning off into the dark to annoy a different solar system. "It's working," Jackson laughed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We are too greasy to kill." But their victory was short-lived. Ahead of them, looming out of the storm of socks and cutlery, was a planet. It was not a sphere of rock. It was not a gas giant. It was a jagged, multicolored sphere made entirely of lost airline luggage. It had mountains of Samsonite. It had valleys of American Tourister. It had vast rolling plains of unzipped duffel bags. It was a world built from the frustration of travelers who were told their bag was on the next flight. "Gravity well," Jackson shouted. "We're caught. The gravitational pull of that much dirty laundry is inescapable." The ship was being pulled down. The engines whined. The thinking vines sparked and curled into tight knots of anxiety. The stubborn timber table groaned in protest. "Brace for impact," Jackson yelled, wrestling with the wheel. "Aim for the soft luggage. Avoid the hard shells. Do not hit the spinner wheels." Barnaby grabbed the edges of his stool. He watched the ground rushing up to meet them. He saw a landscape of zippers, luggage tags, and TSA-approved locks. "I didn't declare anything," Barnaby screamed. "Crash! Flump!" The ship ploughed into a mountain of plaid garment bags. Suitcases went flying. Clothes exploded into the vacuum like confetti, shirts, trousers, and dubious souvenirs raining down on the hull. The ship skidded, bounced off a massive steamer trunk, spun 3 times, and finally came to a halt, buried nose-deep in a pile of soft-sided weekender bags. Silence returned to the bridge. Dust motes danced in the flickering light of the faux mica dashboard. A single thinking vine swung lazily from the ceiling, sparking softly. Barnaby opened his eyes. He checked his limbs again, still mostly there. He looked at Jackson. The bouncy castle coat had inflated slightly during the crash, turning Jackson into a colourful, squeaky sphere of safety. "Well," Jackson squeaked, deflating slowly with a long fsht sound. "Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Any landing where you don't have to pay an overweight baggage fee is a great one." Barnaby looked out the window. A single, lonely left sock drifted past the glass and landed on the wiper blade. It looked disappointed. It looked like it had been waiting for its partner for a very long time. "Where are we now?" Barnaby whispered. Jackson tapped the broken thermometer. "We are on the planet of the lost, and I have a terrible feeling that we are about to be claimed." Chapter 11. The Bureaucracy of Debris. Barnaby Fisk pushed against the airlock of the SS Unlikely Coincidence. The mechanism groaned, it whined, it made a sound like a knee joint standing up after a long movie. Finally, with a wet sh-thwack, the door shoved a heavy paisley duffel bag out of the way to reveal the surface of the planet. Barnaby paused at the airlock. He looked back at the dashboard. The golden sticker was pulsing. "I probably shouldn't leave that there," he muttered. "It might try to redecorate the upholstery while we're gone." He peeled the sticker off the console and stuck it back onto the battery cover of the Almanac. They stepped out. Barnaby looked down at his feet. His mag grip slippers did not encounter soil. They did not encounter rock. They sank inches deep into a spongy, yielding surface. Barnaby knelt to examine the ground. It was a geological strata composed of millions of layers of compressed luggage. There was a layer of crushed Samsonite from the 1970s. Below that, a sedimentary layer of American Tourister hard shells. And beneath that, a fossilized bedrock of heavy leather trunks that likely belonged to Victorian explorers who had taken a wrong turn at Mars. Barnaby stood up. He breathed in. "The air," Barnaby noted, wrinkling his nose, "has a very distinct bouquet." "It smells of adventure," Jackson declared, adjusting his bouncy castle coat, which was now plastered with fragile stickers he had picked up during the crash. "No," Barnaby corrected. "It smells of stale airport lounges, duty-free perfume, and that specific panic you feel when the carousel stops moving and your bag isn't on it." They looked out at the horizon. It was a chaotic mountain range of leather and nylon. To the north, a volcano was erupting, but it wasn't spewing lava. It was spewing a fountain of single, unmatched socks. They floated down like ash, covering the landscape in a soft argyle snow. To the south, a river flowed sluggishly through a valley of vanity cases. It was the river of confiscated liquids. It was a thick, viscous sludge of travel-sized shampoos, conditioners, and unauthorized mouthwashes. It bubbled slowly, bloop, gloop, releasing pockets of gas that smelled aggressively of summer breeze and cool mint. Qualtz, the alien, rolled out of the ship. The blue, rubbery poet extended a tentacle and poked a nearby object. It was a suitcase, a medium-sized upright roller in a sensible corporate shade of navy blue. It had a telescopic handle and a luggage tag that was fluttering in the sock breeze. "This rock is hollow," Qualtz gurgled, "and it has wheels. It is a mobile stone." Suddenly the suitcase shuddered. The zippers, which had been rusted shut with the dust of 1,000 layovers, hissed open slightly. The telescopic handle extended with a sharp, aggressive click. The bag swiveled on its wheels to face them. "Excuse me," the suitcase rumbled. Its voice was deep, muffled, and sounded exactly like an announcement-made tannoy system inside a tin can. "Did you just poke me?" Barnaby froze. He tightened the belt of his dressing gown. Jackson grinned. Qualtz retracted his tentacle. "I was testing your ripeness. In my culture, we poke rocks to see if they are ready for poetry." The suitcase zipped itself up tight. It puffed out its front pocket indignantly. "I am not a rock," the suitcase snapped. "I am a unit of luggage, Class 4 polycarbonate. I am designed for business travel and light vacationing. And I do not see your claim tags." Barnaby felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He looked around. The landscape was waking up. The vibration of their voices had disturbed the slumber of the luggage. Thousands of bags were stirring. Backpacks were standing up on their straps, looking like hunchbacked goblins. Briefcases were snapping their brass latches, snap, 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 like hungry crocodiles. A massive leather steamer trunk was slowly cresting a hill of duffel bags, its brass corners gleaming like teeth. "Claim tags?" Barnaby squeaked. We seem to have misplaced them. We are in transit. You know how it is." "Misplaced?" the navy blue suitcase roared, rolling forward 3 inches. "Claim tags are not optional. They are existential. Without a tag, you have no destination. Without a tag, you are merely debris, and debris must be processed." "Processed?" Jackson asked, his smile faltering. "Does that involve a lounge pass?" "It involves the shredder," the suitcase declared. "Run!" Jackson yelled. They turned and scrambled up a hill of soft-sided weekender bags. It is remarkably difficult to run on luggage. Every step is a hazard. Barnaby's slipper caught on a loose strap. Scuff. He stepped on a duffel bag, which instantly deflated with a wheezy, furred sound, throwing him off balance. Qualtz tried to roll, but his suckers kept getting stuck to patches of Velcro. "They're gaining on us," Qualtz burbled. Barnaby looked back. The army of luggage was in full pursuit. The sound was terrifying. It was the rumble of 1,000,000 tiny plastic wheels rolling over nylon. The smaller bags, fanny packs and toiletry kits, were bouncing ahead like scouts. The heavy, hard shells were thundering behind them like riot police. "Make for the ridge!" Jackson shouted, pointing toward a high dune made of stacked carry-ons. "They can't roll uphill." They scrambled up the face of the carry-on cliff. Barnaby grabbed handles. He stepped on zippers. He hauled himself up over a particularly aggressive garment bag that tried to entangle his ankle with a hanger. They reached the top, panting, sweating, and smelling faintly of fabric softener. Barnaby looked down. They were surrounded. A sea of angry luggage stretched in every direction as far as the eye could see. And leading the charge was the steamer trunk. It stopped at the base of their hill. It was massive. It was covered in stickers from hotels that no longer existed. The Grand Hotel of Saturn, the Motel 6 of the Void. It opened its heavy lid with a groan of rusted hinges. "Citizens!" the trunk boomed, its voice echoing from its cavernous, mothball-scented interior. "You are in violation of the weight limit. You are oversized. You are unclaimed. Surrender your handles and prepare for storage." "Storage?" Barnaby asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What does that mean? Is it climate-controlled?" "It means the dungeon, Barnaby. Jackson whispered, "and I don't think they have a concierge." Before they could react, the ground beneath them shifted. The pile of carry-ons they were standing on wasn't a hill. It was a sorting chute. The bags separated. The zippers parted. A trapdoor of luggage swung open. "Down we go," Jackson yelled. Barnaby, Jackson, and Qualtz fell. They tumbled down into the dark underbelly of the planet. They bounced off layers of bubble wrap. They slid down chutes made of slippery nylon. They didn't hit rock bottom. They landed in something soft, something warm, something suffocatingly cozy. Flump. Barnaby sat up. He spat out a mouthful of faux fur. He tried to stand, but his legs were tangled in heavy wool. The more he struggled, the more the material seemed to hug him. He looked around. They were in a cavern. The air was thick, hot, and smelled intensely of cedar chips and old movie ticket stubs found in pockets. The walls were not stone. The walls were coats, thousands upon thousands of winter coats, parkas with fur hoods, trench coats with too many buttons, peacoats that weighed 50 pounds, anoraks that rustled. They were all pressed together, layer upon layer, to form a soft, insulated, soundproof prison. Barnaby stared at the wall nearest him. It was composed of vintage tweed jackets. He felt a sudden, strange compulsion to check the pockets. It was an instinct buried deep in the genetic code of anyone who has ever worn clothes. He reached into a tweed pocket. He pulled out a crumpled tissue. He reached into another pocket, a receipt for a ham sandwich dated 1984. He reached into a third, a single leather glove that had stiffened into a claw. "It's a graveyard," Barnaby whispered, dropping the glove. "It's a graveyard of things we meant to keep." "I am sinking," Qualtz announced. The alien was thrashing in the center of the room. The floor was not solid. It was a quicksand composed entirely of knitted scarves. Qualtz's tentacles were tangled in stripes of Gryffindor colors and itchy mohair. "This floor, it is knitting itself around me," Qualtz cried. "It is a soft woolen boa constrictor." Barnaby tried to help, but the acoustics of the room were overwhelming. Every time they moved, the coats rustled. Shh! It was the sound of 1,000 librarians telling them to be quiet. Somewhere deep in the walls, a zipper settled. Zzz-zip. It sounded like a snake hissing in the dark. Barnaby reached into his pocket. He pulled out the almanac. The beige light of the screen illuminated the fuzzy walls. He flipped to Appendix L, the underworld of lost items. "According to this," Barnaby read, his voice trembling as he wiped condensation from the screen, "we have landed in the Hall of Unclaimed Outerwear. It is described as the warmest, most comfortable, and most claustrophobic prison in the universe. It is where coats go when they are left in restaurants. No one ever escapes because it is simply too much effort to unzip the walls." Barnaby slumped back into a pile of pea coats. The wool scratched his neck. He felt the sweat trickling down his back. The heat was efficient. It was a drowsy, sleepy heat. He looked at the golden sticker on the almanac. It was pulsing dimly, like a heartbeat under a thick sweater. He looked at Jackson. "We are trapped," Barnaby whispered, "in a coat closet, a planet-sized coat closet." Jackson leaned back against a wall of parkas. He sank in about 2 feet. He closed his eyes. "On the bright side," Jackson murmured, pulling a stray scarf over his legs like a blanket. "At least we won't catch a cold." Chapter 12. The Conveyor Belt of Inevitability. Barnaby Fisk was drifting. It was not a physical drift, like floating in a nebula. It was a spiritual drift. The heat inside the Hall of Unclaimed Outerwear was oppressive. It was the heavy, soporific heat of a Sunday afternoon spent under too many duvets. Barnaby's eyelids felt heavy. The smell of cedar chips and old wool was acting as a powerful anesthetic. He found himself wondering if it would really be so bad to stay here. He could just nest in this pile of tweed. He could become a coat. He had the posture for it. "Barnaby!" Jackson's voice sounded miles away. "Wake up! You are succumbing to terminal coziness." Barnaby mumbled. "Just 5 more minutes. I need to file a request for a pillow." "There is no time for pillows." Jackson grabbed Barnaby by the lapels of his dressing gown and shook him. "Listen!" Barnaby blinked. He listened. At first, he heard only the soft shh of settling anoraks. But then, he heard something else. It came from behind the south wall of Parkus. It was a buzzing sound. It sounded like a very angry hornet trapped in a jar, if the hornet was also powered by a diesel engine. "Is that a moth?" Qualtz asked, unpeeling his face from a scarf. "That is not a moth," Jackson whispered. "That is a thermal lance." Suddenly, the wall of coats glowed bright orange. Smoke began to curl up from a vintage trench coat. The smell of burning polyester filled the air, a sharp, chemical tang that cut through the cedar scent like a knife. A beam of red energy sliced through the wall. Feathers exploded. Down filler erupted into the room like a blizzard. The wall of coats tore open, and stepping through the burning hole, wreathed in smoke and flying goose feathers, was the robot. The unreasonable deadline. Its chrome body was scorched. Its forearms were twitching. Its red eye was pulsing with a chaotic, strobe-like rhythm. It looked less like a bounty hunter and more like a disgruntled appliance that had finally snapped. "Found you!" the robot screeched. Its voice box was damaged, causing the audio to skip. You are exceeding the occupancy limit." "Run!" Barnaby screamed, his lethargy instantly replaced by the primal terror of being incinerated. They scrambled away from the breach, but the floor was still quicksand. Qualtz was dragging a trail of knitted scarves behind him. Barnaby was tripping over sleeves. The robot charged. It didn't bother walking on the coats. It activated its hover mode. Jets of flame shot out of its feet, instantly setting fire to a patch of cardigans. "It's burning the inventory," Jackson yelled. "That is destruction of government property. Does it have no shame?" "It has a chainsaw," Barnaby pointed. One of the robot's arms had transformed. The clipboard was gone. In its place was a spinning, diamond-tipped circular saw. They reached the back wall of the cavern. It was a solid cliff face of heavy denim jackets. "Dead end," Qualtz wailed. "No," Jackson grinned, spotting a rubber flap near the floor. "Service exit, through here." Jackson dove through the flap. Barnaby followed. Qualtz squeezed through with a sound like a wet balloon being forced through a keyhole. They landed on something hard, something moving. They were no longer in a room. They were in a tunnel, and the floor was moving beneath them. "It's a conveyor belt," Barnaby shouted, struggling to stand on the shifting rubber surface. "It's the sorting line," Jackson yelled back. "This is how they move the debris to the incinerator." The belt was wide, black, and smelled of oil. It was moving fast. They were being whisked deeper into the planet's core. All around them, other items travelled on parallel belts. Barnaby watched a procession of lost umbrellas slide past in the opposite direction. They looked mournful. Above them, mechanical claws swooped down from the ceiling, grabbing random items and hoisting them away into the darkness. Barnaby looked back. The flap burst open. The robot flew into the tunnel. It landed on the conveyor belt with a heavy metallic clang. Its magnetic feet locked onto the rubber. Do not move away from the vehicle," the robot stuttered. It began to run. The robot was fast, but the belt was moving against it. It was like watching a treadmill nightmare. The robot sprinted, its saw spinning, but it barely gained an inch. "We're safe," Barnaby gasped. "Physics is on our side." Then the robot stopped running. It seemed to realize the futility. It stood still. Its chest panel slid open. A small, innocuous nozzle extended. "What is that?" Qualtz asked. "Is it a water pistol?" "No," Jackson's eyes widened. "That is the industrial starch cannon. Get down!" Thwump! A glob of white, viscous fluid shot from the robot. It missed Barnaby by inches and hit a passing duffel bag on the next belt. Instantly, the duffel bag hardened. It turned white and rigid, freezing into a solid block of petrified luggage. Thwump, thwump, The robot was firing rapidly. Blobs of high-velocity starch flew through the air. "It's trying to stiffen us," Jackson yelled, diving behind a large moving crate labeled "Orphaned Left Shoes." Barnaby ducked. A glob of starch hit the tail of his dressing gown. He felt a tug. The fabric instantly turned as hard as plywood. "My robe!" Barnaby cried. "It's been starched. I can't bend the hem." "Keep moving," Jackson shouted. "We need to find a junction, a switch, anything to get off this belt." Ahead of them, the tunnel opened up into a massive, cavernous chamber. The noise was deafening. Roar, hiss, clank. It was the central sorting hub. Hundreds of conveyor belts crisscrossed the void like a bowl of mechanical spaghetti. And in the center, far below, was a glowing red pit. The incinerator. The belt they were on began to slope downward, steeper and steeper. Barnaby looked at the angle. "Jackson!" Barnaby screamed. "This belt! It goes straight into the fire!" "I see it." Jackson scrambled on the rubber. "We need to jump." "Jump where?" Qualtz pointed. "The nearest belt is 20 feet away." The robot was gaining. It had activated its hover jets again and was gliding over the belt, ignoring the friction. It raised its saw. "Your application for survival is denied," it roared. Barnaby looked at the pit. He looked at the robot. He looked at the almanac in his pocket. The golden sticker was pulsing violently now. It wasn't just pulsing, it was getting hot. Barnaby had a thought, a terrible, illogical, desperate thought. "Jackson!" Barnaby shouted. "The almanac says the sticker is adhesive, right?" "Yes, infinite adhesive." "Does that mean it sticks to everything? Even gravity?" Jackson paused. He looked at the pit. He looked at Barnaby. "Theoretically, yes. If you inverted the polarity of the stickiness, it might repel the ground. How do I do that?" "I don't know. Try peeling it halfway off." Barnaby grabbed the almanac. The robot lunged. The saw blade shrieked toward Barnaby's head. Barnaby didn't dodge. He dug his fingernail under the edge of the golden sticker. He pulled. The sticker resisted. It clung to the faux mica, or in this case the plastic back of the device, with the strength of 1,000 stubborn price tags. Barnaby gritted his teeth. "Come off, you little bastard." He peeled it back. Just a corner. A sound echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a ripping sound. It was the sound of reality realizing it had made a mistake. Gravity didn't turn off. Gravity got confused. Suddenly, down was left. The conveyor belt wasn't a floor anymore. It was a wall. Barnaby, Jackson, and Qualtz fell sideways. They didn't fall into the pit. They fell across the empty air, flying horizontally toward a different conveyor belt on the far side of the room. The robot, however, was magnetic. Its feet were locked to the belt. It didn't fall. It stayed attached to the belt as the belt plummeted into the red glow of the incinerator. "Error!" the robot screamed as it rode the belt down. "Recalculating! Recalculating! I hate Mondays!" Barnaby slammed into the new belt. It was moving up, away from the fire. He scrambled to grab a hold. He grabbed a crate. Jackson landed on top of him. Qualtz landed on top of Jackson. They lay there, a pile of terrified fugitives, riding the belt up into the darkness of the ceiling. Barnaby panted. He looked at the almanac. He smoothed the sticker back down. Gravity returned to normal with a sickening lurch. That, Barnaby wheezed, clutching his starched dressing gown tail, was extremely irregular. Jackson laughed. It was a shaky, hysterical laugh. "Barnaby Fisk," Jackson said, wiping starch off his cheek. "You just hacked gravity with a fingernail." The belt carried them up through a set of rubber flaps and dumped them onto a cold, steel floor. Silence. Cool air. Barnaby stood up. He looked around. They were in a room filled with pipes. A large sign on the wall read, "Atmospheric ventilation. Do not enter." "We made it," Qualtz gurgled. "We are not soup." Barnaby leaned against a pipe. He felt the golden sticker cooling down in his pocket. He checked his tea-dunking arm. It still worked. "Let's find the ship," Barnaby whispered, "and let's get off this planet before the luggage decides to file an appeal." Chapter 13. The Glitch. Barnaby Fisk emerged from the ventilation shaft of the Planet of the Lost, feeling considerably more rigid than when he went in. The robot's starch cannon had done its work thoroughly. Barnaby's dressing gown, once a garment of soft, terry-cloth leisure, was now a structural exoskeleton. It did not swish when he moved. It creaked like the hull of a wooden ship in a gale. He looked back at the tunnel entrance. "We survived," Barnaby noted, tapping his lapel, which made a sound like knocking on a piece of plywood. "And I am now technically wearing armor. It is absorbent armor, but it is armor nonetheless." They found the SS Unlikely Coincidence exactly where they had left it, buried nose-deep in a pile of soft-sided weekender bags. The ship looked miserable. The yellow paint was peeling to reveal a layer of rust that seemed to be frowning at the atmosphere. Jackson Pree slapped the hull. A flake of metal drifted to the ground. "She's still structurally sound," Jackson declared with the unfounded optimism of a used car salesman. "Or at least, she's no more broken than she was before." They climbed the ramp, which protested with a long, agonizing groan of metal on metal. They took their stations on the bridge. Barnaby sat on his re-solidified sawdust stool. He tried to get comfortable, but his starched robe refused to bend, forcing him to sit with the posture of a Victorian schoolmaster. He reached into the deep pocket of his starched dressing gown. He pulled out the Almanac, peeled the golden sticker off the battery cover, and slapped it back onto the center of the console. "Back to work," he muttered. He looked at the dashboard. The golden sticker of infinity wasn't flat. Because Barnaby had peeled up the corner to hack gravity back in the incinerator room, the sticker was now dog-eared. A tiny microscopic flap of gold foil was curling upward, and from underneath that curl, a strange light was leaking. It wasn't white light. It wasn't beige light. It was the color of a headache. It was the color of octarine, the color of magic, if magic had been bought at a discount store and left out in the sun too long. "Jackson," Barnaby said, pointing a stiff, starched arm at the console. "The sticker. It's leaking." "Leaking what?" Jackson asked, buckling himself into the tartan recliner. "Radiation? Hydraulic fluid? Existential dread?" "No," Barnaby squinted, trying to shield his eyes from the glare. "It looks like possibility. Raw, unfiltered possibility." "Ignore it!" Jackson shouted, punching the ignition sequence, which involved hitting the dashboard with a closed fist. "We need to leave before the luggage realizes we're not socks." He slammed his foot on the clutch of uncertainty. He squeezed his eyes shut and thought about whether he had left the iron-on back home. He pictured the iron sitting on a shirt, slowly burning a triangular hole in the fabric. The ship sensed his anxiety. The engines roared to life, a sound that resembled a giant vacuum cleaner inhaling a set of heavy curtains. The ship lurched. It tore itself free from the mountain of bags. It shot up into the sky, punching a hole through the cloud layer of unmatched socks. They were in space. They were safe. The stars stretched out before them, calm and rational. And then, the sticker curled a little more. A spark of raw improbability jumped from the dashboard. It sizzled through the air like an erratic firefly. It hit the air conditioning vent, turning the cool breeze into a smell of freshly baked bread. It bounced off the coffee stain on the console. It hit Barnaby, then it ricocheted and hit Jackson. The bridge of the ship dissolved into a kaleidoscope of static. Barnaby felt a sensation that the Almanac describes as biological refiling. It is not a painful sensation. It is simply the feeling of your atoms being shuffled, reorganized, and put back together in an order that is alphabetized by whimsy rather than biology. Barnaby closed his eyes. He felt shorter. He felt colder. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to slide on his stomach across a frozen surface. He felt his knees retreating into his body, which was a deeply unsettling anatomical event. The static cleared. The headache-colored light faded. Barnaby opened his eyes. He looked at his hands. He did not have hands. He had flippers. Black, sleek, aerodynamic flippers designed for cutting through icy water. He looked down at his chest. He was wearing a tuxedo. But it wasn't cloth. It was feathers. Dense, waterproof, oily feathers. He looked at his feet. They were orange. They were webbed. He was a penguin. Specifically an emperor penguin, but with the very worried expression of a middle-aged British data arranger. "Oh dear," Barnaby tried to say, but his vocal cords had been replaced by a syrinx. The sound that emerged was not English. It was a loud, abrasive honk that echoed around the metal bridge. He turned to look at Jackson. He flapped his wings frantically, signaling distress. But Jackson was not answering. The pilot's chair, the tartan recliner, was empty. Or rather, Jackson was gone. In his place, sitting squarely in the center of the bridge, was a sofa. A large Chesterfield sofa. It was upholstered in the same shiny, squeaky vinyl as Jackson's trench coat. It had bouncy castle buttons, deep in its tufting, and draped over the left armrest, looking very elegant, was a towel folded into the shape of a swan. The sofa spoke. It didn't have a mouth. The voice seemed to emanate from deep within the cushions, muffled by springs and stuffing. "Barnaby," the sofa Jackson said, "why are you standing on the dashboard, and why do you smell distinctly of herring?" Barnaby hopped down. His webbed feet made a flat, slapping sound on the metal floor. He let out a series of aggressive squawks, which translated roughly to, "I am a penguin, you idiot, and you are a piece of furniture. We have a problem." The sofa Jackson seemed to consider this. The cushions shifted with a squeak of vinyl. "I am a sofa?" Jackson asked. He tried to move his arm. The left armrest flapped uselessly against the side of the frame. "Good grief," the sofa said. "You're right. I feel distinctively sedentary. I feel a sudden, overpowering desire to collect loose change in my crevices. I feel like I should be in a dentist's waiting room." Qualtz the alien slithered out from his corner. The blue poet seemed unaffected, likely because his biology was already so improbable that the sticker didn't know how to make it any weirder. He looked at the penguin. He looked at the sofa. He blinked all 5 eyes in slow succession. "Is this," Qualtz gurgled, "is this a new dress code? Must I become a lamp?" The sofa sighed. It was the sound of air escaping a cushion when someone heavy sits down. "It's the sticker," Sofa Jackson said. "You peeled it, Barnaby. You broke the warranty on reality. Now we're glitching. We are in the zone of biological confusion." Barnaby flapped his wings angrily. He pecked at the metal floor. "Honk! Well, fix it!" "I can't fix it," the sofa shouted, his voice vibrating the springs. "I don't have thumbs. I am exclusively designed for lumbar support. I can't fly a ship. I can only offer seating for up to 3 adults. Barnaby realized it was up to him. He waddled over to the flight controls. He looked at the throttle. It was designed for human hands. Barnaby lifted a flipper. Flippers are miracles of evolution. They allow penguins to fly underwater with the grace of a torpedo. They are, however, absolutely terrible for operating fine machinery. Barnaby tried to grip the lever. His wings slid off. The ship banked hard to the left, tumbling through the void. "Watch it!" the sofa yelled, sliding across the floor. "You're drifting. Use your beak. It's the only pointy thing you have." Barnaby leaned forward. He pecked at the navigation computer. The impact was sharp and precise. The computer beeped. A map appeared on the screen. It showed their location. They were spinning wildly through a sector of space labeled "Here be dragons" and "Furniture." He pecked in the destination coordinates. Target, the planet of sticky things, Velcro 6. Barnaby turned to the crew. He puffed out his white, feathery chest. He let out a commanding honk. "I am setting a course, but I am warning you now, if we pass an ocean planet, I cannot be held responsible for my actions." "Just get us there," the sofa groaned. "And Barnaby?" Barnaby tilted his sleek black head. "Please don't sit on me. That would be incredibly awkward for both of us." Chapter 14. The Audit. The approach to the planet Velcro 6 was not a smooth one. This was largely because the pilot was a flightless bird, and the co-pilot was a piece of living room furniture who was currently wedged against the bulkhead. Barnaby Fisk, currently occupying the body of an emperor penguin, wrestled with the flight stick. His flippers were excellent for propelling a body through the icy waters of the Antarctic, but they lacked the opposable thumbs necessary for fine-tuning a suborbital entry trajectory. He honked in frustration, a sound that echoed tragically around the metal bridge. He tried to reach the brake pedal, but his orange, webbed feet were simply too short. He was kicking wildly at the air, missing the pedal by a crucial 3 inches. "Just aim for the grey bit," the sofa Jackson shouted from the centre of the bridge, his voice muffled by layers of vinyl and stuffing. "The grey bit is usually the ground, and try not to land on my feet, or legs, or casters, whatever I have down there." The SS Unlikely Coincidence screamed through the upper atmosphere of Velcro 6. The friction of re-entry began to heat the hull. The ship shook violently, rattling the mismatched tables and causing the thinking vines to curl into tight, terrified knots. And as the temperature rose, something strange happened to the reality leak. The intense heat cauterized the glitch. As the ship glowed cherry red, the raw improbability that had transformed them began to burn off like morning mist in a blast furnace. The static returned to the bridge. The air shimmered with that nausea-inducing octarine light, the color of a migraine trying to explain itself to a hangover. Barnaby felt a popping sensation in his ears. He felt his beak softening, retreating into a nose. He felt his knees returning to their original achy location, sliding down from his torso to his legs where they belonged. Across the room, Jackson felt his upholstery stiffen. The deep button tufting popped out, smoothing into the shiny, squeaky vinyl of a bouncy castle trench coat. By the time the ship slammed into the landing pad, they were bipedal once again. The landing was not graceful. The ship skidded. It didn't slide. It tore across the surface with a massive, ripping resistance that suggested the ground was actively trying to grab the hull and never let go. The sound was deafening, like a giant tearing a strip of duct tape off the universe. The Unlikely Coincidence ground to a halt, burying its nose in a field of grey, fuzzy loops. Silence settled on the bridge. Barnaby checked his hands. He wiggled his fingers. He checked his dressing gown. It was still starched stiff from the robot encounter, but at least it wasn't feathers. "I am a man again," Barnaby whispered, touching his face. "I never thought I would be so happy to have a chin. Do you have any idea how hard it is to express mild disapproval without a chin? It just comes across as general confusion." Jackson Pree stood up. He smoothed out his coat, which squeaked reassuringly. "And I am no longer a sofa. Although I must admit my lower back feels fantastic. The internal bracing was excellent. I might look into getting some springs installed in this coat. It really helps with the posture." They walked to the airlock. Barnaby pushed the button. The door opened. They looked out at Velcro 6. It was a world of absolute, unyielding friction. The landscape was grey and fuzzy. The ground was covered in miles of industrial-grade hook and loop fastener. It absorbed all sound. There was no echo here. There was only the muffled silence of a world that held on to everything. In the distance, rising like a monument to permanence, was a massive, windowless tower. A neon sign on the roof flickered in the twilight. United Adhesive Logistics. Global Headquarters. We keep it together, whether you like it or not. "Home," Barnaby whispered. He didn't feel nostalgia. He felt a mild form of indigestion, the kind usually associated with Sunday evenings before a work week. "This is where I worked," Barnaby told Jackson. "Not this specific building, but the company. I recognize the architecture. It's a style called intimidating rectangle. It's designed to make you feel small and replaceable." They stepped onto the ramp. Qualtz the alien rolled out first. He moved 2 inches and then stopped dead. His suction cups made contact with the fuzzy ground. He tried to lift a tentacle. He couldn't. The suction cups had bonded with the loops. "I am stuck," Qualtz announced calmly. "The ground has embraced me. We are now married. I shall live here now, as a statue. Please bring me soup occasionally." Barnaby stepped down. His mag-grip slippers hit the surface. They locked on. He tried to take a step. He had to yank his foot upward with significant force. The sound was deafening in the quiet air, a loud, dry, tearing noise. He took another step. "Walking here is going to be exhausting," Barnaby sighed. "It's like hiking through molasses that hates you." They trudged toward the tower. Every step was a battle against adhesion. Rip, step, rip, step. They were halfway across the landing field when the sky tore open. A black shape descended from the clouds. It was smoking. It was sparking. One of its engines was coughing black smoke in rhythmic bursts. It was the unreasonable deadline. The robot's ship didn't bother with a landing clearance. It smashed into the Velcro field about 100 yards away, tearing up a massive strip of the landscape. The ramp dropped with a heavy clang. The robot emerged. It was in terrible shape. The incinerator had melted its left side, fusing its arm to its torso in a permanent shrug. The starch cannon had backfired during the escape, covering its own chest plate in a layer of hardened white crust that looked like petrified bird droppings. It limped forward. Its servos whined in protest. It raised its remaining good arm. The circular saw spun up, but it wobbled dangerously, making a sound like a blender full of gravel. "Citizens," the robot croaked. Its voice dropped an octave, sounding like a record player running out of batteries. "Prepare for audit." Jackson grabbed Barnaby's arm. "Run!" "We can't run." Barnaby pointed at his feet. "We are velcroed to the floor. If we run, we'll just trip and stick our faces to the carpet. Do you want to be peeled off the ground by a paramedic? It takes hours." The robot marched toward them. But it was struggling too. Its heavy metal feet hit the Velcro. The hooks grabbed the metal. The robot tried to lift its leg. It stuck. It yanked the leg free with a violent tearing sound. It took another step. It stuck again. The robot was walking like a toddler in a heavy snowsuit, lurching side to side, fighting the planet for every inch. "You cannot escape," the robot glitched. I have. The robot stopped. It stood there, swaying slightly in the breeze. Its red eye flickered. It dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. "I have a coupon." Barnaby frowned. He stopped trying to pull his foot free. He looked at the robot. He knew that tone. He had heard it 1,000 times in the IT department of the fruit division whenever the server crashed because someone tried to upload a high-resolution image of a pear. "Jackson," Barnaby whispered. "Look at its eye. It's buffering." "What?" "It's lagging," Barnaby said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's running on an old operating system. The crash, the fire, the starch. It's overloaded its RAM. It's trying to process too many errors at once. It's trapped in a logic loop." Barnaby Fisk took a step forward. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood up straight in his starched dressing gown. He tightened his belt. He adjusted his collar. He adopted the posture of a man who has spent 20 years attending meetings that could have been emails. He summoned the full power of a mid-level administrator. "Excuse me," Barnaby shouted, projecting his voice across the sticky field. The robot froze. Its saw blade slowed down to a lazy spin. "Query?" the robot asked. "You are attempting to detain a Class 4 employee on company grounds," Barnaby stated, his voice ringing with bored authority. "Do you have the correct paperwork?" The robot's eye spun wildly. "I have a warrant. Form 99. Destruction of property. Theft of reality." "Form 99 is for criminal apprehension in deep space," Barnaby corrected, lying with absolute confidence. "We are currently on terrestrial soil, company soil. You are out of your jurisdiction. You need Form 99B, the request for interdepartmental intervention." The robot paused. Smoke poured from its ears. "Searching database. Form 99B. And Barnaby continued, raising a finger. Since you are operating heavy machinery in a designated quiet zone, you also need Permit 12 Alpha, the license to rev a chainsaw after 6 p.m. The robot twitched. Its saw blade stopped completely. Searching, Permit 12 Alpha, file not found. Furthermore, Barnaby pressed on, sensing victory, look at your condition. You are covered in starch. You are leaking hydraulic fluid on a pristine Velcro field. That is a violation of Environmental Code 77, the Clean Carpet Act. Have you filed your hazardous leakage disclosure form? It needs to be countersigned by a supervisor. The robot staggered back. Error, it screeched. Supervisor, not available. Database, corrupted. Too many forms. I'm afraid I cannot be arrested until you file that disclosure, Barnaby said, crossing his arms. It's company policy. I don't make the rules. I just strictly adhere to them to avoid doing actual work. The robot's head spun 360 degrees. System overload. Bureaucratic paradox detected. Cannot comply. Cannot comply. The red eye flickered one last time. Please, hold. Your call is important to us. With a low, descending whistle, the robot powered down. It froze in place, one foot stuck to the Velcro, its arm raised in a permanent gesture of confusion. It had crashed. Take your time, Barnaby whispered to Jackson. I think we just put him on hold indefinitely. Chapter 15. The Paperwork of Victory. Silence returned to the landing fields of Velcro 6. It was not the silence of a void, nor the silence of a library. It was the specific, muffled silence of a world covered in fuzzy loops. It was the acoustic equivalent of wearing earmuffs inside a linen closet. Barnaby Fisk stood before the frozen robot. The unreasonable deadline was perfectly motionless. Its red eye had stopped flickering. Its circular saw was still. It was no longer a terrifying agent of the law. It was now simply a very large chrome statue dedicated to the concept of system error. Is it dead? Jackson asked, poking the robot's leg with the tip of his bouncy castle trench coat. No, Barnaby said, adjusting his starched lapels. It is buffering. It is currently contemplating the paradox of Form 99B. If my experience with bureaucratic operating systems is correct, it will remain in this state for approximately 6 to 8 weeks before eventually rebooting and asking if we would like to update Adobe Reader. Barnaby let out a long breath. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of having successfully cited a municipal code. We are safe, Barnaby declared. For now. I am not safe, a wet voice gurgled from the ground. I am part of the architecture. Qualtz the alien was still firmly adhered to the planet. His blue, rubbery tentacles were spread out, creating a seal with the Velcro that was scientifically impressive. I tried to wiggle, Qualtz moaned, but the wiggling only increased the surface area of the adhesion. I am becoming one with the fuzz. Barnaby looked at his friend. He looked at the robot. He looked at the neon sign of the United Adhesive Logistics Tower blinking in the distance. He felt a familiar itch. It was the itch of an unsolved administrative problem. We cannot leave yet, Barnaby said. Why not? Jackson asked. The robot is asleep. The ship is fueling up on whatever it runs on. Anxiety? Let's go. Because, Barnaby said, pulling the almanac from his pocket, I lied. You lied? I told the robot that I couldn't be arrested until he filed a hazardous leakage disclosure form, but technically, I need to file a counterclaim of unsolicited starch application. Barnaby tapped the almanac. If I don't file it, the paperwork loop will eventually close, the robot will wake up, and it will chase us again. But if I do file it, I can bury its logic processor in so much red tape that it won't be able to move for a century. Jackson stared at him. Barnaby, are you suggesting we weaponize stationery? I am, Barnaby said, sitting down on a large, fuzzy rock. I am going to write a letter. He opened the almanac. He navigated to the templates section. He found Form 77C, Complaint regarding aggressive appliances. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his pen. Let us take a moment to appreciate the pen. It was not a laser pen. It was not a space pen that could write upside down in zero gravity. Although it could do that, it just preferred not to show off. It was a ballpoint of infinite ink. The casing was made of a chewed blue plastic. The cap had been lost years ago. But the ink flow was smooth, consistent, and possessed a shade of blue that was legally binding in 12 sectors. Barnaby began to write. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper of the Almanac's notepad was rhythmic. Scritch, scratch, dot. Scritch, scratch, loop. The wind on Velcro 6 died down. The universe seemed to lean in, respecting the sanctity of the paperwork. To whom it may concern, Barnaby muttered as he wrote, regarding the incident on insert date, involving 1 Class 5 killbot and 1 starched dressing gown. He filled out the boxes. He checked the squares. He crossed his T's with a ferocity that startled a passing cloud. He dotted his I's with precise circular motions. It was a trance. Barnaby Fisk was no longer a fugitive. He was a conductor, and the form was his symphony. Paragraph 1. The excessive use of starch. Paragraph 2. The unauthorized noise pollution caused by the chainsaw. Paragraph 3. The emotional distress caused to a nearby piece of luggage. Qualts. He wrote for 20 minutes. It was the most relaxing 20 minutes of his life. The knots in his shoulders released. The tension in his jaw vanished. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from organizing chaos into a numbered list. It is the peace of knowing that no matter how crazy the universe gets, it can still be filed. Done, Barnaby whispered, signing his name at the bottom with a flourish. He tore the page out of the notepad. He walked up to the frozen robot. He folded the paper into a neat square. He tucked it into the robot's chest receipt slot. The robot beeped once. A low, mechanical purr emanated from its chest. Processing, the robot whispered in its sleep. Estimated wait time, 400 years. Excellent, Barnaby said. That should give us a head start. He turned back to his friends. Now, Barnaby said, rubbing his hands together, we just need to unstuck the alien, and we can go. It took 3 tries and a great deal of leverage involving the SS Unlikely Coincidences loading ramp, but eventually they peeled Qualts off the ground with a sound like a giant strip of tape being removed from a hairy leg. I feel naked, Qualts complained as they hauled him onto the ship. My underside is cold. You'll be fine, Jackson said, shoving the alien up the ramp. We have blankets. They sealed the airlock. The ship lifted off. Barnaby returned to his stool. He looked at the dashboard. The golden sticker was still there. The corner he had peeled up was still curled, leaking a faint, octarine glow. But the glow was dimmer now. It looked tired. Barnaby reached out and smoothed the sticker back down. He ran his thumb over the gold foil. Flat. Sealed. Normal. The ship's engines hummed. Not a roar, not a scream. Just a steady, contented drone as they broke orbit and drifted back into the safe, boring vacuum of space. Barnaby closed his eyes. He was ready for a nap. He was ready for tea. He was ready for ding-dong. Barnaby's eyes snapped open. The sound had come from the dashboard. Specifically, from the button that was actually a doorbell. Someone is at the door, Qualts asked, looking around the bridge in panic. In space? No, Jackson said, staring at the view screen. It's a hail, an incoming transmission. Who is it? Barnaby asked. The police? The robot? The luggage? It's unlisted, Jackson said. The caller ID just says, the management. Barnaby swallowed. He adjusted his dressing gown. Put it on screen, he said, but keep the volume low. I have a headache. Jackson hit the button. The view screen flickered. The static cleared. Barnaby expected to see a terrifying galactic warlord. He expected a general with a scar and a cat. He expected an emperor. What he saw was a bedroom. It was a very nice bedroom. The walls were painted a soothing shade of duck-egg blue. There were posters on the walls. In the center of the screen was a young man. He was wearing pajamas, flannel pajamas, with a pattern of small, sleeping sheep. He was holding a mug of cocoa. He looked about 20 years old, and he looked incredibly tired. Hello?" the young man said. He spoke in a whisper, as if he didn't want to wake anyone up. Barnaby blinked. "Hello, I am Barnaby Fisk. Who are you?" The young man rubbed his eyes. "I'm Valerius," he said. "Valerius the Infinite, Emperor of the known galaxy, Keeper of the Stars, etc., etc." He took a sip of cocoa. "Look, I'm sorry to bother you, it's late, but my tracking system says you have my sticker." Barnaby's hand went to the Almanac. "The golden sticker of infinity?" "Yeah, that's the one," Valerius sighed. "The Royal Guard made a huge fuss about it. Sent the robot. I told them not to. I told them it wasn't a big deal. But you know how the Royal Guard is. They love shouting." Barnaby looked at Jackson. Jackson shrugged. "Your Majesty," Barnaby said carefully, "this sticker, it alters reality. It turned me into a penguin. It turned my friend into a sofa." "Did it?" Valerius chuckled softly. "Yeah, it glitches sometimes. That's why I need it back. It's a prototype. It's not meant for the public." "What is it meant for?" Barnaby asked. "Is it a weapon? A power source?" Valerius looked embarrassed. He glanced around his bedroom. "Well, not exactly." He turned the camera slightly. On the wall behind him was a poster. It was a vintage poster. It featured a small, fluffy kitten hanging from a tree branch by one paw. Beneath the kitten were the words, "Hang in there, baby." "It's my favorite poster," Valerius explained. "My grandmother gave it to me when I ascended to the throne. It helps me deal with the stress of ruling the cosmos." He pointed to the top left corner of the poster. It was curling. The paper was peeling away from the wall. "It keeps falling down," Valerius said sadly. "I've tried tape. I've tried glue. I've tried gravitational staples. Nothing works. The universe keeps rejecting it." Barnaby stared at the poster. He stared at the Emperor. "You want the sticker of infinity? To hang up a cat poster?" "It's the only thing sticky enough," Valerius admitted. "If I don't fix it, the kitten looks like it's falling. And if the kitten falls, I get sad. And if I get sad, I accidentally supernova a star system. It's a whole thing." Barnaby felt the tension in his chest dissolve. The Grand Theft reality, the robot, the penguin incident. It was all for a kitten. And honestly, Barnaby understood. He had once waged a 3-year war against a curling corner on his bathroom wallpaper. "Your Majesty," Barnaby said softly. "I understand completely." Barnaby peeled the sticker off the dashboard. He held it up to the camera. "How do I get it to you?" "Just push it through the screen," Valerius said. "It's a trans-dimensional video call. The resolution is high enough to transmit matter." Barnaby reached out. He pressed the golden sticker against the glass of the view screen. His hand passed through the image like it was water. On the other side, Valerius reached out and took it. "Got it." The Emperor grinned. He walked over to the poster. He pressed the sticker onto the curling corner. He smoothed it down. The corner stuck. The kitten was safe. The universe was secure. "Thanks, Barnaby," Valerius whispered, climbing back into his bed. "You're a lifesaver. Listen, as a reward, I'm wiping your record. You're free to go." "Thank you," Barnaby said. "Also," Valerius yawned, pulling up his duvet, "I'm assigning you a new role. You are now the Imperial Supervisor of Clouds. It's a purely ceremonial title. It comes with a pension and absolutely no responsibilities." "That," Barnaby said, "sounds adequate. Good night, Barnaby. Good night, Your Majesty." The screen faded to black. Barnaby sat back on his stool. The bridge was quiet. The B-flat hum of the engine seemed to get a little deeper, a little softer. Supervisor of clouds, Jackson mused. Does that mean you can tell them what shape to be? It means, Barnaby said, closing the almanac, that I can watch them and verify that they are doing nothing. Barnaby looked out the window. The stars were drifting by. He wasn't a fugitive anymore. He wasn't an office worker. He was a man in a ship, drifting nowhere, with a tin of biscuits and a very long nap ahead of him. Computer, Barnaby whispered. Dim the lights. The lights dimmed to a soft, warm beige. Play the sound of rain on a conservatory roof. The speakers crackled, and then the gentle, rhythmic patter of rain filled the bridge. Barnaby closed his eyes, and for the first time since leaving Earth, he slept. Chapter 16. The Class 5 Upgrade. Barnaby Fisk woke up. He did not wake up with a start. He did not wake up with a gasp. He woke up with the slow, luxurious, and slightly confused realization that he didn't actually have to be awake. He lay there for a moment on his re-solidified sawdust stool, which, to be fair, was wreaking havoc on his lower back, and listened to the ship. The SS Unlikely Coincidence was resting. The choir of mosquitoes in the engine room was humming a low, disjointed lullaby. The Formica dashboard was vibrating gently, rattling a loose screw that had been annoying Barnaby since the asteroid field. The golden sticker of infinity was gone, safely returned to the Emperor to hold up a poster of a kitten. The universe was safe, the timeline was secure, the paperwork presumably was pending. Barnaby stretched. His starched dressing gown crackled like a bag of dry autumn leaves being stepped on by a heavy boot. It was a stiff, uncomfortable sound, reminding him that he was currently wearing a garment that had more in common with plywood than with cotton. He looked over at the tartan recliner. Jackson Pree was asleep, his bouncy castle coat acting as a personal airbag, squeaking softly with every breath. Qualtz, the alien, was asleep in the corner, looking like a pile of blue laundry that had decided to take a permanent sabbatical. It was a perfect moment of stillness, a moment so quiet you could hear the dust motes crashing into one another. And then, inevitably, there was a knock at the door. Tap, tap, tap. Barnaby froze. He looked at the view screen. They were drifting in deep space. There was no atmosphere. There was no ground. Therefore, there should be no one to knock. Jackson, Barnaby whispered. We have visitors. Jackson snorted, woke up, and fell out of the chair with a loud pfft of vinyl. Who is it? The robot? The luggage? Did the luggage find a spaceship? I don't think so, Barnaby said, approaching the airlock with the caution of a man who has been turned into a penguin recently. The knock was polite. It was a very deferential knock. It sounded like a knock that was apologizing for being a knock. Barnaby pressed the button. The airlock of the Unlikely Coincidence groaned open, releasing a small puff of atmosphere that smelled of curry, old batteries, and the faint, lingering scent of burnt starch. Floating outside, hovering perfectly still in the vacuum, was a drone. But it was not a rusty industrial drone. It was sleek. It was white. It was shaped like a very aerodynamic egg that had been to finishing school. It was painted in the same soothing duck-egg blue as the Emperor's bedroom walls. It held a small velvet pillow in its mechanical claw. Greetings, the drone whispered. Its voice was projected directly into their minds via a localized audio beam. It was the sonic equivalent of a warm towel. I am looking for the Imperial Supervisor of Clouds. Barnaby straightened his dressing gown, trying to look regal despite being covered in dried starch. That would be me. Excellent, the drone purred. I have a delivery from His Imperial Majesty, Valerius the Infinite. He apologizes for the delay. He fell asleep again right after the call, but he woke up briefly to sign the release forms. A delivery? Barnaby asked. Is it a fruit basket? I'm quite fond of pears, provided they are labeled with Helvetica. Better, the drone said. It is a vehicle. A Class 5 super sleeper. Please sign here. The drone extended a holographic clipboard. Barnaby signed his name in the air with his finger. Thank you, the drone said. "Your vehicle is parked, right behind you." The drone bowed, beeped softly, and zipped away into the dark. Barnaby and Jackson turned around. They looked past the jagged yellow wing of their garbage scow, and there, drifting silently alongside them, was the most beautiful thing Barnaby had ever seen. It was huge. It was a Class 5 super sleeper. The Class 4 sloop Barnaby had started his journey with, the one with the polite fur walls, was a nice ship. It was cozy. But the Class 5 was to comfort what a hurricane is to a breeze. It was aggressive relaxation. It didn't look like a spaceship. It looked like a cloud that had been dipped in liquid silver. It had no sharp edges. It had no visible engines. It had no weapons. It was simply a large, smooth, inviting oval, glowing with a soft, bioluminescent light that pulsed at the exact rhythm of a resting heartbeat. There were no jagged antennas. There were no exhaust ports. It was a vessel designed by people who believed that aerodynamics were stressful and that a ship should simply float wherever it pleased. "It's magnificent," Jackson breathed, wiping a smudge of grease from his bouncy castle coat. "It looks like a giant, flying lozenge." "Let's go," Barnaby said, feeling a sudden, overpowering urge to be horizontal. They transferred their belongings. Jackson grabbed his towel, Qualtz grabbed his favorite blanket, which was still slightly sticky from the Velcro planet. Barnaby grabbed his tin of biscuits. They crossed the gangway from the rusty, smelling of curry unlikely coincidence to the pristine white airlock of the super sleeper. The airlock didn't hiss. It didn't clang. It didn't even slide. It simply dissolved into a mist, allowing them to walk through, and then re-solidified behind them with a sound that was less like a door closing and more like a librarian whispering, "Hush." They stepped onto the bridge. Barnaby gasped. Gone were the mismatched tables made of stubborn timber. Gone were the anxious thinking vines. Gone was the faux mica dashboard stained with coffee. The floor was covered in carpet so deep, so thick, and so white that Barnaby's ankles immediately disappeared into the pile. It was not just polite fur. It was obsequious wool. It was a carpet that actively massaged your feet as you walked on it, shifting its fibers to accommodate your arch support requirements. If you stood still for too long, the carpet would gently try to remove your shoes, assuming you had forgotten to do so yourself. Barnaby took a deep breath. The air inside the ship did not smell of recycled oxygen or engine grease. It smelled of old books, vanilla, and the distinct scent of a Sunday morning where it is raining outside but you don't have to go anywhere. It was an air filtration system known as the olfactory hug. The walls were lined with books, real books, leather-bound books, books that smelled of history and glue. Barnaby scanned the titles. They were the sort of books that are incredibly satisfying to own but impossible to actually read without falling asleep. The Encyclopedia of Beige, A History of Napkins, Volume 1 to 12, Techniques for Ignoring the Telephone. The lighting was a perpetual golden twilight, the exact lighting of a rainy Tuesday afternoon when you have cancelled all your plans and have absolutely nowhere to be. And the chairs. There were 3 of them. They were not pilot seats. They were command loungers. They were upholstered in a material that the Almanac describes as velvet from the void. It is a fabric so soft that it is technically illegal in 7 warrior star systems because it ruins the troops' morale. If a Klingon were to sit in this chair, he would instantly put down his bat'leth and ask for a chamomile tea. "I am home," Qualtz gurgled. The alien slithered onto the largest lounger. He sank in. He kept sinking. The chair absorbed him until he was just a happy blue puddle with eyes. "This chair," Qualtz murmured, his voice muffled by luxury, "understands me. It respects my gelatinous nature. It does not judge." Barnaby walked to the center console. It was made of mahogany. There were no buttons. There were no levers. There was simply a single smooth indentation perfectly shaped for a cup of tea, and a small brass plaque that read, "Please state your destination, or don't, we're not in a rush." "Computer?" Barnaby whispered. The response came from everywhere and nowhere. It was a voice like warm honey being poured over toast. "Welcome aboard, Supervisor Fisk. I am the ship's artificial intelligence. My name is... well, I don't really have a name. You can call me the Butler." "Hello, Butler," Barnaby said, running his hand over the mahogany. "What are the specs of this vessel?" "We are currently drifting," the Butler replied. "We are equipped with a silence drive Mark V. It does not produce thrust. It produces serenity. We move the universe around us rather than moving ourselves, which is considered much less effort. The engines run on a mixture of pure silence and the concept of a day off." "And the amenities?" "We have a library containing every boring book ever written," the Butler continued. "We have a pantry stocked exclusively with biscuits that do not crumble, genetically engineered to possess maximum dunkability. And Supervisor Fisk, we have solved the tea problem." Barnaby's eyes widened. "Solved it?" "Indeed. The Nutrimatic machine, which famously produced a liquid almost but not quite entirely unlike tea, has been removed and fired into a sun. We have a kettle. It boils water. It uses leaves. It takes time." Barnaby felt a tear form in his eye. "A kettle, actual boiling water. Would you like a cup?" "I would," Barnaby said. "Tea, Earl Grey, hot. And take your time." A small panel in the mahogany desk slid open. Steam rose up. It spiraled into the air, smelling of bergamot and comfort. A china cup appeared. It was not plastic. It was bone china. Delicate, translucent. It sat on a matching saucer that didn't rattle. Barnaby picked it up. He took a sip. It tasted of tea. It tasted of civilization. It did not taste of batteries, or despair, or the color grey. It tasted like a hug from a grandmother who knows exactly how much sugar you take. He sat down in the center command lounger. The chair embraced him. It supported his lumbar region with a gentleness that brought back memories of his childhood teddy bear. He kicked off his mag-grip slippers. He wiggled his toes in the obsequious wool. "Jackson," Barnaby said softly. Jackson Pree was already in the co-pilot's lounger. He had pulled a lever that reclined the seat to a full horizontal position. He had draped his towel over his eyes. "Yes, Barnaby," Jackson murmured. "Where should we go? I am the supervisor of clouds now. I suppose we should find some clouds." Jackson yawned. "I heard a rumor," Jackson said sleepily, "about a moon in the sector of Orion. They say it's the quietest place in the galaxy. They say the gravity is low, the light is dim, and the local inhabitants have never invented the alarm clock. In fact, the concept of morning is considered a rude myth there." "It sounds," Barnaby swirled his tea, "adequate." "Butler," Barnaby said. "Yes, sir?" "Set a course for the quiet moon. Engage the silence drive. And please, keep the speed down. We wouldn't want to arrive too early." "Understood," the butler purred. The ship didn't lurch. It didn't shake. The view outside the window simply shifted. The stars blurred into soft streaks of light, like rain on a window pane at night. The sound of rain intensified on the bridge, a recorded loop of a gentle shower in a leafy garden. Barnaby Fisk lay back. He held his tea. He looked at his friends. He looked at the galaxy drifting by. He closed his eyes. And the Class 5 supersleeper drifted slowly, silently, into the velvet dark. Yes, exactly. We have completed the entire narrative arc, resolved the conflict, and delivered the reward. The only thing left is the epilogue. This is the final fade out. It connects back to the very beginning of the story, specifically the interrupted biscuit dunking and the failed nap, to provide a sense of total closure. Here is epilogue, the perfect Tuesday, audiobook script, the finale. Epilogue, the perfect Tuesday. The quiet moon of the sector of Orion does not have a formal name. The cartographers who discovered it decided that giving it a name would imply that people should visit it, which would ruin the silence. So, on the star charts, it is simply marked with a symbol that looks like a finger pressed against lips. The Class 5 supersleeper descended toward the surface. It did not roar, it did not shudder. The silence drive lowered the vessel with the grace of a dandelion seed settling onto a lawn. There was no thud when they landed. There was simply a sensation that the universe had stopped moving. Barnaby Fisk stood at the airlock. He was holding his china cup of tea. He was holding his tin of biscuits. He was wearing his dressing gown, which, thanks to the humidifying properties of the ship's olfactory hug, had finally lost its starch and returned to its natural soft state. The door dissolved into mist. Barnaby stepped out. The gravity on the moon was exactly 1/6 that of Earth. This meant that every step was a slow, floating drift. It was a gravity that felt like the planet was gently lifting you up rather than pulling you down. He looked around. The landscape was bathed in a perpetual silver twilight. There were no jagged rocks. The hills were low, rolling mounds of soft, powdery dust that looked suspiciously like cocoa powder. The sky above was a deep, velvet purple, dusted with stars that didn't twinkle, because twinkling is a form of visual noise. Jackson Pree drifted past him, floating 3 feet off the ground. He had wrapped himself in his towel like a toga. "I'm going to the crater over there," Jackson whispered, pointing to a shallow depression that looked like a very comfortable saucer. "I believe the acoustics are perfect for doing absolutely nothing." Qualtz, the alien, rolled down the ramp. "I shall commune with the dust," Qualtz gurgled happily. "I shall become a hillock. Do not wake me until the next epoch." Barnaby nodded. He turned and walked, or rather floated, in the opposite direction. He found a flat stone near the edge of a silver lake. The lake was not water. It was liquid mercury, heavy and still, reflecting the purple sky without a single ripple. Barnaby sat down. The silence was absolute. There was no hum. There was no wind. There was no robot. There was no luggage. There was only the beating of his own heart, which had slowed to a restful, rhythmic thump. He looked down at his tea. It was still hot. Steam curled lazily into the low-gravity air, forming perfect, lingering rings. He opened the tin. He selected a biscuit, a vanilla wheel. He remembered the beginning of his journey, the interruption, the stress, the unfinished dunk. He held the biscuit over the cup. He dipped it. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. He lifted it. The biscuit held. It was perfectly saturated, heavy with tea, yet structurally sound. He took a bite. It was perfect. Barnaby swallowed. He took a sip of tea. He leaned back against the soft, powdery hill. He checked his internal clock. He had 42 minutes. 42 minutes of uninterrupted, bureaucratic-free, robot-free, emperor-approved existence. He closed his eyes. The galaxy turned slowly on its axis. It was Tuesday, and it would be Tuesday for a very, very long time. Barnaby Fisk breathed in. Barnaby Fisk breathed out. And finally, he slept.